They were two soldiers serving their country.
They met in the military, got married.
They had a life that they were building.
They was always together. They always was, like, happy.
But a new year begins in horror.
My husband was shot. I need help.
He was shot in the head and also in the torso.
I don't know what his condition is, but it does not look good.
It is impossible.
That's my oldest son, and I've been so proud of him.
An Army hero becomes the victim of gunfire in his hometown.
Was this a robbery gone bad?
This could have been a retaliation type shooting.
The truth is the last thing anyone expected.
I just started shaking my head like I couldn't believe it.
I'm looking back like, wow.
It was the ultimate betrayal.
December 31st, 2018. It's New Year's Eve in St. Joseph Township, Michigan, a suburban community just outside the blue-collar town of Benton Harbor.
St. Joseph and Benton Harbor are literally right across the street from each other.
Benton Harbor used to be a big manufacturing town. The jobs left, though, so Benton Harbor's gone through some economic challenges.
New Year's Eve in this area comes with a unique tradition.
Typically what people do there, New Year's Eve at midnight, they go out, pop off their guns.
New Year's Eve in Benton Harbor can get a little dangerous because random bullets do come down. We've had them strike cars before, strike houses.
This year, the sound of gunshots rings out earlier than expected.
Tyrone? Tyrone! Tyrone!
Less than an hour before midnight, 22-year-old Kamaya Hassel exits her in-laws' home to find her husband lying on the ground, covered in blood.
911, what's the address of the emergency?
I need help. My husband was shot.
Okay, where are you at, ma'am?
I'm in Colfax Avenue.
Okay, and tell me exactly what happened.
Camille stated that she heard shots, went outside, saw her husband laying on the ground.
Your husband's outside? Okay, stay on the line with me. Ma'am, take a deep breath. Take a deep breath from me, okay?
She was just hysterically crying, so it was hard to get some information from her.
Did you see anybody around? Ma'am? Okay. Ma'am, take a deep breath with me, okay?
But before the dispatcher can get any more information, the call suddenly cuts off.
Is he breathing? Hello?
The dropped call sends dispatch scrambling.
Wife advising her husband has been shot.
When the call came out, we all responded code 3, which was with our lights and sirens.
When police arrive, they find Kamaya Hassel cradling the bloody body of her husband, 23-year-old Tyrone Hassel III.
Man, we're gonna have to get him on this cot, okay? I know, but let me get in there, man, okay?
She was kneeled over Sergeant Hassel, hysterically crying.
Sergeant Hassel was on the ground with an apparent gunshot wound to the head.
We just do little art projects with them and all of the kids.
For Tyrone Hassel III, joining the military was nowhere near a last resort.
He grew up in Benton Harbor area, went to Benton Harbor schools.
He went to college for a little while and decided college wasn't for him and he wanted to join the military and serve his country.
I really didn't want him to go. Oh, I don't want him fighting, but it was his decision. It was something that he really wanted to do.
Despite his family's concerns for his safety, they knew better than to test Tyrone's resolve.
That was just his character. Once he had his mindset on something, that's what he was doing.
He was a focused individual. Whatever he was doing, he would really focus on it and try to be the best he can be at all of it.
Once enlisted, Tyrone's determination had put him on the fast track for a series of promotions.
He rose up the ranks pretty quickly.
He made sergeant at an extremely young age. He had a great future ahead of him.
I was proud as heck.
Sergeant Tyrone Hassel had found his calling.
It was fun for him. And he was like, sometimes it don't even feel like work. I know that he wanted to continue his career in the Army.
In addition to a promising career, Tyrone also found love in the ranks with fellow soldier Kamaya Martin.
They met while they were serving in the Army together.
They're in the same brigade, but different units.
He started telling me some things about her, and I was like, okay, seems like she's a down-to-earth girl. So I was very happy for him.
I really knew that he had found somebody special because he talked to me about marriage, and it was serious.
They had such a passionate connection. They just couldn't get enough of each other.
Their relationship was bliss. They were in love.
Eventually, he proposed to her and they were married.
Thrilled that Tyrone had found someone to share his life with, his family welcomed Kamaya with open arms.
Hey, Mom. How you doing, Mother? I'm good. I can't complain, you know.
We spoke all the time. We FaceTimed each other all the time. And she just be like, hey, Mom. And she was just so happy.
Tyrone shared Kamaya's happiness.
He really did love her. He always talked about her. He was always happy, smiling, seeing what he was going to do for her.
Sergeant Hassel was very much in love with Kamaya, called her his queen.
All right, I love you. Love you too, Mom. We'll see you and talk to you later.
Tyrone and his queen were soon expecting a prince.
When she first got pregnant, he called me. And he was like, you about to be a grandma. And he was so happy.
In February of 2017, Kamaya gave birth to a healthy baby boy. And later that year, the family moved off base.
They bought their own house down in Georgia where they were stationed.
Their house was a little bit outside of Savannah, and they was going to be closer to Kamaya's parents. Her parents stay in Atlanta.
However, the Army had other plans for the Hassels.
They never really got settled in. They moved to their house and they was gone.
They got deployed to Korea, I think it was early February 2018.
After spending most of the year in Korea, Tyrone and Kamaya were back in the States by Christmas.
She came to Michigan with Tyrone to visit his family over the holidays.
They were up here for vacation from Fort Stewart, Georgia, on leave from the military, staying with Tyrone Hassel's father.
But now, less than an hour before the new year begins, their happy homecoming takes a tragic turn.
Around 11 o'clock, December 31st, 911 call comes in. It's Kamaya Hassel. Someone has shot her husband right outside of the house that they were staying at.
When police arrive on the scene moments later, they find Kamaya on the ground next to her husband.
It's incredibly chaotic when they get out there.
Don't let anybody come up here, guys.
There were neighbors gathered on the street. They need to get officers down to the victim.
Hey, bud, I know this is messed up. We got to get you guys out of here so we can secure this scene, okay?
You show me on scene.
The medics, they're trying to tend to Sergeant Hassel.
I actually had to pull Kamaya Hassel away from him so that paramedics could get in there and work.
There was blood. It was a bad scene.
However, just as the officers at the scene fear the worst, there's a ray of hope.
Hospital's a short distance away. I knew it wasn't good for him. When the paramedics announced that he had a sign of life, with that being said, they immediately load it and go.
After spending most of 2018 overseas, Tyrone and Kamaya Hassel were home in time to spend the holidays with family.
They were up in Michigan on their block leave from the military, staying with Tyrone Hassel's father.
Whenever he's here, we always do something big because he likes to be around family.
However, on New Year's Eve, just minutes before midnight, the couple's happy homecoming turned into a nightmare.
Oh my God. Tyrone!
Where was your husband shot?
A priority call come over the radio regarding a possible shooting. We responded, and what we found was a crazy scene.
Now, as paramedics fight to save Tyrone's life, it's up to detectives with the St. Joseph Township Police to piece together what happened.
Man, we're gonna have to get him on this cot, okay? I know, but let me get in there, man, okay?
The medics have to keep Kamaya Hassel away. She was very upset and crying, covered in blood on her clothes from the injuries that he sustained.
Whoa.
She climbed into the back of the ambulance. At one point, I actually grabbed onto her and pulled her out.
We gotta collect some evidence. I know what the hell's going on.
Ma'am, you gotta come out here with us, okay? Come on out.
She was hysterical. She was crying.
We gotta figure out what happened, but you're gonna be in the way in there, okay?
As we walked down the driveway, she dry heaved. Once I got her calmed down a little bit, we talked about what she witnessed and what she may have seen.
Do you have any idea what happened here?
No, he just brought us something to eat.
They were staying at Tyrone's dad's house, but Kamaya decided to stay at the house with their son while Tyrone went to a family gathering for New Year's Eve.
But Kamaya and their little boy were never far from Tyrone's mind.
Hey, baby. A little after 10 o'clock, Tyrone called Kamaya and offered to bring her and their son food from the party.
You want me to bring you a plate?
Yeah, if it's not too much trouble.
It's no problem, baby. I'll do anything for my queen.
He's celebrating, but he wants to make sure that his wife and his son are okay. So he brings them the plate of food.
You know what? What's up, baby?
Thank you.
How's the little boy tonight?
He's doing good.
You want me to stay here and give you a kiss at midnight?
You should go. I'm sure they'll miss you.
All right, baby.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, baby.
Sergeant Hassel walked out the door. And that's when Kamaya heard the gunshots.
Tyrone?
You heard gunshots?
Yeah,
And then
gunshots. I looked out the door and I seen my husband laying on the side of the truck and I ran outside.
Tyrone!
how many shots did you say you heard?
Approximately 3 o'clock or so, which is about the same time Danielle left. He had gone to
Came across
sports
5
practice.
shell casings, which were actually some of them laying right in the blood.
Based on the crime scene, detectives are able to theorize how the shooting occurred.
We believe that the suspect came around the back side of the truck and then shot him.
We didn't think it was just a random shooting. And one of the things that myself and a couple other officers said from the word go is that this was personal.
Do you know of any other situation that was going on where he might have gotten into something like this where he was getting shot at?
They asked numerous times, you have any idea who could have done this? Every time she said, no, I have no idea who did this.
There was not any indication from her that he had been involved in any disputes or issues that would have gotten him in the situation he was in.
Your dad? Yeah.
Tyrone's father backs up Kamaya's claims that his son had no enemies.
Kamaya had called Tyrone's father after she called 911, which explains why the phone call was suddenly cut off.
Came to find out she disconnected her call with them and called me.
She called me crying. I can't understand what she said. She said somebody shot Tyrone. And he don't have a record. He told me a long time ago, Daddy, if I go to jail, somebody frame me.
Tyrone Jr. is quick to offer another possibility.
I thought somebody was trying to rob him. He had a really nice truck, so I thought maybe that somebody was trying to steal his truck. And when Kamaya ran out, they took off running.
However, detectives find evidence to the contrary.
He had money in his pocket. He had his fancy watch on his wrist. His truck was locked. There were still items. You know, his phone was plugged in inside the truck. It just didn't appear to be a robbery. It definitely appeared to be something personal.
I want y'all to find out who did this.
The search for the shooter takes on a new urgency when word comes back on Tyrone's condition.
Tyrone's stepmother, Ashanti, was a nurse and was actually working that evening at the hospital where paramedics brought Tyrone.
I just heard it come over the radio. So immediately I started running to the front part of the hospital. And I seen one of our ambulance drivers on top of him doing compressions.
Within minutes, one of the doctors emerges from the trauma wing with grim news.
Dr. Campbell came back out and He said, there's nothing that we can do. And that's when it like really set in that he's gone. And I just started shaking my head like, no. Couldn't believe it.
Less than an hour after being shot outside his father's home, doctors at a nearby hospital have just pronounced 23-year-old Army Sergeant Tyrone Hassel III dead.
And I just was pretty much in disbelief about what was going on. Honestly, I thought I was having a heart attack because I've never felt like that before.
Tyrone's mother arrives at the hospital shortly after to learn the fate of her son.
I just broke down. I just started screaming, no. He can't be dead.
While Tyrone's family grieves, St. Joseph police are now investigating their first homicide of 2019. They continue interviewing neighbors who have gathered at the scene.
We'd had multiple officers interviewing people and trying to determine if anybody saw any suspicious people or vehicles or anything in the neighborhood.
If you get the plate off that car back there, got or not?
It's basically a residential community. We usually do not have a lot of serious crime in that area.
As we're actually working their scene, there's still gunshots popping off all over the place.
Ben Harbor, St. Joseph area, it's well known that people fire off guns at midnight to celebrate the New Year.
Jesus, it's a freaking war zone out here.
Everybody heard shots that night, but it was very hard to distinguish if, in fact, they actually heard the shots from the scene or due to the fact that it was New Year's Eve.
Just after sunrise, detectives find an elderly couple on the next street over who did see something unusual.
They saw a vehicle back into a driveway of a residence that was for sale at the time, so there was no one living there.
About what time was this?
9:30, 10.
Okay.
Somewhere around there, right?
They described it as being a dark-colored four-door sedan.
Tuesday night.
The witnesses also saw the driver.
Home, studying with my friend Dominic.
According to Jermichael, his friend Dominic Locke has been denied.
Later, got out of bed completely and started walking. And I watched him, he went and turned left.
Okay.
They noticed the driver walk southbound down that street, which would have been in the direction where Sergeant Hassel was staying.
Detectives almost instantly suspected this was the person that shot and killed Tyrone.
The only reason I think he's involved is it's weird, because he was here, what, 2 or 3 days ago, and parked there the same way.
The neighbors indicated that they noticed this car driving in the neighborhood and parked there on several different occasions in the few days leading up to the murder.
It sounded as if the killer had been staking out the house, waiting for a chance to ambush Tyrone.
The idea that Tyrone was being targeted doesn't add up for detectives.
Tyrone Hassel was an Army sergeant who was home on leave, visiting family over the holidays.
He didn't even live here anymore.
We started looking at other possibilities that maybe he was not the person they were targeting.
We thought maybe this could have been a mistaken identity type of thing.
However, when detectives received Tyrone's autopsy report the next morning, the findings suggest the shooting was no mistake.
The shooting was up close. We're talking within 3 to 5 feet away.
That person who shot him seen his face. It was too close. Whoever did that knew who he was.
This was somebody that targeted him.
And detectives want to know why.
Was Tyrone really the straight-laced, all-American soldier that everyone believed him to be? Or could he have been involved in something that his family and even his wife didn't know about? Something that got him killed?
We started retracing Tyrone's steps in the days previous to his shooting. We interviewed his friends.
And the police are looking at every single lead they can find. No stone is left unturned in an investigation like this.
Detectives find the lead they're looking for when they receive a tip about an altercation Tyrone had 2 days prior to his death.
We were given information that he was at the local skating rink and that he possibly had words with somebody there.
Detectives now have a possible motive.
What's up, Rico?
This could have been a retaliation type shooting.
The Gun Violence Archive Organization reported 14,623 deaths by gunshot in 2018, a 7% decline in fatal shootings from 2017, and its only decline in the past 5 years. Firearm-related injuries also declined in 2018, dropping 10% from the previous year. Detectives investigating the murder of 23-year-old Army Sergeant Tyrone Hassel III have just learned that he may have been in an altercation 2 days before being gunned down.
This occurred when Tyrone and a few of his friends had been at a local roller rink.
What's up, Rico?
There was some indication that there was another group of guys there kind of giving some looks to Sergeant Hassel and his group of friends.
Detectives bring in one of the friends that was at the skating rink with Tyrone, who confirms what they've heard.
His friend described this person giving him looks like he was upset with them or there's some kind of issue between those two.
He was looking all crazy and stuff, and Tyrone spoke to him, and he didn't speak back. And then he walked away. He was like, hell with him then.
It was basically just a look, and sometimes the look can lead to stuff.
And he just like give off this vibe like
We just do
like,
little art projects with them and all of the kids.
Popping up into something.
The man in question is known on the street as Rico.
Did you guys know him from the neighborhood? Yeah.
No, he seems like he's older than us.
Tyrone's friend says rumors are swirling that Rico had something to do with the murder.
I don't want to blame it on just a coincidence and me knowing based off the type of person he is or how they make him to be.
Right.
It can seem.
Yeah.
After talking to Tyrone's friend, detectives bring Rico in for an interview.
He had some prior record of him being in trouble with our department.
He was cooperative, said, hey, it wasn't me. I didn't do this.
I heard he got shot, but I don't know where people got the idea it was me.
He was like, man, I've been walking around here for 3 days not even knowing that people saying that I did this.
But you did see him at the skating rink. Yeah, but I didn't say nothing to him. Look, I had nothing to do with this, I swear.
There was no previous incidents regarding him and Tyrone. It was basically this, you know, maybe it was a misunderstanding or maybe somebody misinterpreted his look at Tyrone.
So where were you on New Year's Eve?
At a party over in Benson Harbor.
For how long?
I got there like 10 o'clock. Then go home till 3:30 in the morning.
Detectives release Rico and immediately check on his alibi.
Rico's alibi held up. Multiple people saw him at the party, and he never left.
It appears to be a dead end for detectives.
Officer Peppers was able to eliminate that subject.
With Rico ruled out, several days pass, and the investigation into Tyrone's murder isn't producing new suspects.
We're getting nowhere. I've got nothing to link this guy to anything bad.
Then on January 10th, more than a week after the shooting, detectives get a break.
We got a phone call at our office from someone who claimed to be on a military base in Georgia.
The anonymous caller's tip changes everything.
It was about Kamaya having an extramarital relationship with another soldier who was also in their same unit.
People were shocked because it seemed they were happy together. It didn't seem that there were any issues.
We made some phone calls down to Fort Stewart, Georgia. An Army Criminal Investigations Division got involved and started interviewing people on base.
What the Army investigators learn is explosive.
The fact that there was actually an affair going on was pretty well known throughout the base.
Detectives learn Kamaya's lover is a soldier named Jeremy Cuellar.
Jeremy Cuellar was in the same platoon as Kamaya Hassel. They became friendly with each other.
The one witness stated that he knew that Camille was not happy in her marriage, and she was leaning on Jeremy, for support.
Witnesses state that while on deployment to Korea, Jeremy and Kamaya's friendship had become something more.
In Korea, I knew Clay has to mess around.
So when you say messing around, what are you getting at with that?
Oh, yeah, like sexually.
Witnesses actually saw them physically together in the barracks.
It was my understanding, based on some of the witnesses, is that he was full-on head over heels in love with this woman.
Detectives now suspected that this affair was connected to Tyrone's murder. They just need to figure out how.
It was hers.
Army officers investigating the murder of Sergeant Tyrone Hassel III have just made the bombshell discovery that Tyrone's wife Kamaya has been having an affair with a soldier in her unit, 24-year-old Jeremy Cuellar.
It's a big, big leap, something that completely broke this wide open.
Does the affair also mean Tyrone's widow was involved in his death? When Army investigators inform Michigan detectives what they've learned, they don't think so.
I was the officer who was with her right after this happened. She appeared in every way to be as shocked as everybody else was. And she appeared to have genuine emotion. She was dry heaving in the driveway.
However, after talking to Army investigators, Michigan detectives do know one thing. Jeremy did have opportunity to commit the crime.
He was on the same block leave they were, and when he had signed his papers where he was going, he's actually going to his mother's house in Chicago.
St. Joe Township is about an hour and a half by highway from Chicago. We're right on Lake Michigan, about 23 miles from the Indiana border.
According to the Army investigators, Jeremy very well could have been in St. Joseph at the time of the crime.
When I was speaking to Special Agent Thompson from the military, he mentioned that, by the way, I have his vehicle description.
It seemed to be consistent with the car. The neighbors indicated that they had noticed leading up to the time of the murder.
The Army investigators also give detectives Jeremy's license plate number.
We have what's called plate scanners on the highway to see if that vehicle had entered Michigan, and it was actually picked up on I-94 at 8:27 New Year's Eve.
Scanners also picked up Jeremy's car crossing back into Indiana at around midnight.
Jeremy had been in the area, and it all matched up with the times that we had for our shooting.
When detectives pulled Jeremy's phone records, they narrowed the window even more.
We tracked his phone data in the area of the murder at the time of the murder, right next to the cell tower, right near the house of the victim, which was great physical evidence that couldn't be contradicted.
However, there's no evidence in Jeremy's phone records suggesting that Kamaya was in on the murder.
The phone records didn't show any calls or texts between Jeremy and Kamaya either in the days leading up to the murder or on New Year's Eve.
Was this just a guy that was infatuated with her, that wanted her, and wanted to do away with Tyrone to have an opportunity to have her and her not know about it? We don't know for sure.
Convinced Jeremy Cuellar is their shooter, detectives draw up an arrest warrant, but Army investigators contact them with a new development.
We were receiving information from another soldier who was also in their same unit.
Jeremy was very close with this other soldier, and he believed he could trust this soldier.
According to the investigators, Jeremy had confessed to this soldier shortly after returning from leave.
He had returned back to the base to report for duty.
I need to get this off my chest. What happened?
According to his friend, Jeremy went into vivid detail about Tyrone's murder.
Jeremy told him that he walked up, shot him a couple of times, Tyrone fell, and then he ended up shooting him again in the head. to make sure that he was dead.
He gave specific information which was consistent with information we had.
When investigators questioned why Jeremy killed Tyrone, the witness claimed Jeremy did it for love. And what's more, Kamaya helped with the planning.
Creek, at approximately 3 o'clock or so, which is about the same time Danielle left.
When he's coming and going.
Sports practice.
The witness even knew how they managed to do all of that without a trace of it showing up on Jeremy's phone records.
They were communicating back and forth with Snapchat.
Any messages that you send to someone on Snapchat, they'll disappear within a certain amount of time.
The soldier's revelation about Kamaya's involvement takes St. Joseph detectives completely by surprise.
Based on what I saw at the scene, I would have never suspected Kamaya initially. If she did this, she's a great actor because she definitely made it seem like she was genuinely upset and crying.
Seeing her originally at the scene, I didn't think she had anything to do with it.
And detectives soon discover a possible motive for Kamaya to conspire in her husband's murder.
He did have death benefits.
With him being gone, then she'd be the beneficiary of $500,000.
Was Kamaya's greed really what led to Tyrone's murder? Or was it her feelings for Jeremy Cuellar?
At that point, we needed to get Kamaya Hassel in our presence for an interview.
They called the victim's father, said, hey, we need you to come into the sheriff's department and bring Kamaya.
And I'm thinking they calling both of us over there to give us some type of information.
Once down at the station, Tyrone's father begins to realize that Kamaya is in serious trouble.
All right, come on.
They immediately separate us, and he said, Kamaya, you go in here.
Should I wait?
You should probably go home.
And when he said that, I kind of slowly walked back to my car, and I was like, what the hell?
Detectives waste no time asking Kamaya about Jeremy.
What was going on? Did he just start working you? Did it start in Korea?
In Korea, that's where it started. Like, we weren't sexual or anything, but we were really close.
Since several people on base knew about the affair, detectives knew immediately that Kamaya was covering up her affair and her involvement in the crime.
At that point, we were starting to believe she was a suspect.
I didn't see Kamaya being behind this at all. I thought she was just a true, genuine sweetheart, even up until the time that they told me that she had an affair. I still was in disbelief. I had loved this person as my own daughter so much that it was like I couldn't find fault in her. I needed to hear the facts. I wanted to know each and every detail. It was just unbelievable.
Michigan detectives investigating the murder of Army Sergeant Tyrone Hassel III suspect that Tyrone's widow, 22-year-old Kamaya Hassel, was in on the crime.
There was actually an affair going on between Kamaya Hassel and Jeremy Cuellar, and it was pretty well known throughout the base.
Under questioning from detectives, Kamaya denies the affair.
She was not admitting to anything. She and Jeremy were just friends.
I was just feeling so bad. And it's just like he was just there, like, listening and everything. When things weren't going the way I needed to go with my husband, I would talk to Jeremy.
That same day, while the Michigan detectives question Kamaya, Army investigators arrest her lover, Jeremy Cuellar, at Fort Stewart.
He was taken into custody without incident. He didn't give him any problems.
At least, not until Army investigators get him into the interview room.
And at this point in time, do you wish to have a lawyer?
Yeah.
Okay.
He lawyered up, refused to talk.
Army investigators inform St. Joseph detectives of Jeremy's request for counsel.
If they wanted the truth, they needed to break Kamaya.
So we kept hammering. We know that you know Jeremy, there's some communication between you guys.
These Snapchat messages, are they gonna make you look like you're pushing us?
Yeah. It's gonna make me look like I pushed it.
Okay.
Tuesday
Jeremy's
night,
gonna
the night
bail
that
out.
she went missing.
I was home,
And the Snapchat
staying with my
was
friend
coming out.
Dominic.
According to Jermichael, his friend Dominic Locke had spent the night.
At that point, she kind of came full circle and started telling us the whole situation.
However, Kamaya insists that the whole thing was Jeremy's idea and proceeds to tell them exactly what Jeremy had done.
For 3 or 4 days, he drove up here, sat around and waited, scoped out his location, then drove back to Chicago.
Kamaya claims that on New Year's Eve, Jeremy planned to wait in his car and ambush Tyrone, but he grew impatient.
According to Kamaya, Jeremy was getting ready to abandon the plan and leave.
Then, Tyrone's love for Kamaya and their child gave Jeremy the opportunity to make his move.
Hey, baby. Man, they cooking up some good food.
Want me to bring you a plate?
Yeah, if it's not too much trouble.
That's when she actually did a Snapchat to Jeremy. Don't go. He's bringing me food right now.
She set him up. She knew he's coming home.
He got there just before 11 o'clock, gave her the place of food, said, I'll see you in a little while.
Happy New Year, little man.
According to Kamaya, after saying his goodbyes, Tyrone walked right into the trap that she and Jeremy had set for him.
Jeremy Coyer was out in the driveway when Sergeant Hassel came outside. He just shot him.
Tyrone collapsed to the ground, gravely injured.
He was still breathing, and Jeremy Coyer then shot him again.
Then, after giving Jeremy a moment to make his escape, Kamaya called 911.
Wake up, Tyrone! Oh my God! I need help! I need help! My husband was shot. I need help!
She basically fooled a lot of officers, and those are seasoned veterans, including myself.
Why didn't you call the finance out this divorce? Is the money part of it?
The money is part of it, yes. But main reason being is because I just felt like if I would have called it off, like Jeremy probably would have been upset at the fact that I called it off.
After her chilling admission, detectives charged Kamaya Hassel with murder.
Everything was a complete shock because we had no clue.
I didn't see Kamaya being behind this at all. Never, not once.
Come on here with us, okay?
When Kamaya goes on trial in July 2019, she continues to point the finger at her lover, Jeremy Cuellar.
She kind of pointed at Jeremy as being the manipulator, that she didn't plan it.
However, the prosecution presents evidence that proves Kamaya was just as involved as Jeremy in planning Tyrone's murder.
While in jail, Kamaya spoke to her mother over the phone very candidly.
We were actually able to obtain records of all of the phone calls.
She calls her mother and tells her mom it's all true.
Y'all planned it. Yeah.
Mom is shocked. Why didn't you divorce him?
I don't even know. I was just really in a bad place.
That was played at trial. I think that sealed her fate.
She was found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder.
Kamaya Hassel's sentencing was life without the possibility of parole.
After Kamaya's trial, Jeremy decides to enter a plea of guilty to second-degree murder.
He was sentenced to a minimum of 65 years.
In an unusual display of remorse, Jeremy Cuellar reaches out to Tyrone's father and attempts to apologize for what he'd done.
Sergeant Hassel's father did a video conference.
And he was like, I know this is not going to bring our son back, but I'm sorry.
I know that is not even enough.
You know, I'm gonna just tell you my side, you know.
I didn't cuss this dude out and tell him how much I wanted to kill him. I just wanted to hear everything he had to say.
Right now, you're probably my worst enemy, and I'm talking to you.
And he basically told me that he didn't shoot my son for money. He said that he was in love with my son's wife.
Honestly, I was blind. Like, I was blinded. You know, I thought that was love. You know what I'm saying?
It appeared Kamaya had fooled Jeremy, just as she'd fooled Tyrone and everyone else.
She played everyone. She played us, she played him. She knew he loved her, and I think she took advantage of that until it was time to kill him.
Now Tyrone's family is determined to never forget the son, soldier, and father Kamaya took from them.
He was a hero. He stood up for our nation, and he lived his life to the fullest.
That's the type of attitude that he had. And I just want people to remember him like that.
I look at his picture every day. I tell him I love him. I just want him to know that he's missed like no other. I miss him so much.
Missing. We ran the plates on a truck abandoned about a quarter-mile from your Mustang scene this morning. It's registered to Robert Pap. Frankel felt a sudden, cold drop in his stomach. The pieces were moving, but they were moving in a way that didn't make sense. It was like a puzzle, where the edges matched, but the pictures didn't. The trucks were swapped, Silas said, his voice dropping an octave. The killer took the Papes truck from Fernley, drove it to Mustang, killed Ellis, took Alicia's truck, and drove it back to the Papes' house. Why? Frankel asked, his eyes fixed on the gray ribbon of the highway ahead. If you've already got a truck, why go back to the house where you got it? Maybe he left something behind, Silas said, or maybe he wasn't finished. The drive to Fernley took 20 minutes through the canyon, the road hugging the green ribbon of the river where the cottonwoods still grew. Fernley was a town of subdivisions built over old alfalfa fields, a place where people moved to get away from the reno taxes, only to find the same wind and the same dust waiting for them. When they arrived at Oak Street, the smell of wet soot and charred pine was heavy in the air. 2 fire engines were parked at angles across the street, their yellow hoses snaking across the wet asphalt like giant worms. The house was a modest, single-story ranch, with a neat lawn that had been churned into black mud by the fireman's boot. The garage was a black, hollow shell, the roof having collapsed inward over the charred frame of a car. A tall, thin man in a brown uniform was standing near the mailbox, his hat pulled low over his eyes. His name tag read Duth. Detective Marty Duth, Lyon County, he said, shaking Frankel's hand. His grip was dry and hard. We've got a mess here. Where are the Papes? Frankel asked, looking at the smoking ruins of the house. Fire department swept the place, Duth said, shaking his head. They say it's clear. No one home. We tried calling their son over in Fallon, but we haven't reached him yet. We're hoping they were out of town. They're 8. They don't usually travel without telling the neighbors, though. Frankel walked toward the green F-150 parked in the driveway. The passenger side was scorched. The paint blistered into black bubbles from the heat of the garage fire, but the interior was intact. He peered through the glass. On the front seat lay a small, red plastic gas can. It was empty, its nozzle missing. He used Alicia's truck to carry the gas, Frankel said. Then he set the garage on fire to destroy the evidence, but he didn't realize the wind would carry the heat away from the truck in the driveway. Or he didn't care, Silas said from behind him. He was looking at the front door of the house, which had been kicked inward. The wood around the lock splintered into white toothpicks. If the Papes weren't home, why is the door kicked in? Chapter 6. The shampoo scent. The interior of the Vance house was cool, dark, and thick, with a smell of wet plaster and cold smoke. Frankel, Silas, and Detective Duth walked slowly through the living room, their flashlights cutting thin, yellow beams through the airborne soot. The floor was covered in a layer of gray water from the fireman's hoses, reflecting the light like oil. They did a quick search, Duth said, his voice echoing in the ruined space. But you know how it is during an active fire. They're looking for living people, breathing people. They don't check the corners. Frankel stopped in the kitchen. On the laminate counter sat a baking sheet. On it were 12 strips of bacon, cooked until they were black and curled, the grease cold and white in the pan. Beside it was a half-eaten loaf of white bread and an open jar of mayonnaise with a knife still sticking out of it. Someone was eating here, Frankel said, his flashlight beam lingering on the mayonnaise. Recently, within the last 12 hours. The neighbors said they hadn't seen the Pape since Sunday, Duth said. But the fire started this morning at 5. He was living here, Silas said, his voice flat. He killed them all, they fled and he just stayed. He made himself breakfast. Let's check the bedrooms, Frankel said. They moved down the narrow hallway, their boots squelching in the wet carpet. The master bedroom was at the end of the hall. The bed had been stripped of its sheets, the bare mattress stained with a large, dark circle that had not come from the firewater. On the floor near the nightstand were several white, soapy trails. Frankel knelt, touching the substance with a gloved finger. It was slick, thick, and smelled of cheap lavender. Shampoo, he said. He poured shampoo all over the carpet. To cover the smell, Silas said. Old trick, doesn't work. But people try it when they've got a body rotting in the heat. They're in here, Frankel said. He stood up and pointed his flashlight at the walk-in closet in the corner of the room. The closet door was closed. Frankel reached out, his hand steady, and pulled the door open. The space was packed with clothes, flannel shirts, summer dresses, and winter coats hanging from the racks. But on the floor, beneath a heavy pile of blankets and winter quilts that had been pulled down from the top shelf, was a mound that was too large, too irregular. Duth stepped forward, his hand on his holster. Frankel reached down and pulled back the corner of a green wool blanket. Underneath lay Robert Pape. He was wearing his pajamas, his silver hair matted with blood from a wound in the center of his forehead. Beside him, her arm draped across his chest as if in sleep, was Dorothy. She had been shot twice in the chest. The air in the closet was warm, thick, and sweet, with the unmistakable odor of advanced decomposition. 3 days, Silas whispered, his voice shaking slightly for the first time. They've been dead since Saturday or Sunday. And he stayed, Frankel said, his flashlight beam shaking on the dead couple's faces. He stayed in the house with them. He cooked their food. He slept in their house. He used their truck to go to the store. We've got a monster, Duth said, his voice dropping to a whisper. A real, live monster. Chapter 7. The Blood of the Companion. The news of the double homicide infernally spread through the town like the fire that had gutted the Pape's garage. By noon, the street was lined with television news vans from Renault, their satellite dishes pointed toward the mountain peaks. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered at the police barricades, their faces pale and anxious under the midday sun. Frankel stood on the porch of the Pape home, his notebook open, while Silas coordinated with the state crime lab. The son is on his way from Fallon, Duth said, walking up the steps. He's not good. He wants to know why we didn't check on them earlier. We didn't know, Frankel said. But we do now. We need to find out who had access to this house. Anyone who did yard work. Anyone who delivered things. There's something else, Duth said, looking down the street. The neighbor's house, just 2 doors down. A woman named Angie Duff. She usually volunteers at the senior center on Tuesday mornings. She didn't show today. Her friend called the office about 20 minutes ago. Frankel looked toward the house Duth was pointing at. It was a neat, yellow-painted cottage with a white picket fence and a small garden of tomato plants in the front yard. Did anyone check her place? Frankel asked. 2 deputies went over, Duth said. They knocked, but no answer. They're waiting at the back gate. Frankel didn't wait. He walked down the steps and started down the sidewalk, his hand resting instinctively on the grip of his service weapon. Silas and Duth followed him, their boots clicking on the dry pavement. The back gate of the yellow cottage was made of redwood, secured by a simple latch. As Frankel reached it, he noticed a small, dark spot on the wood near the handle. It was wet, reflecting the sun. He touched it with his finger. It was red, thick, and sticky. Blood, he said. He pushed the gate open. The backyard was small, with a small lawn and a concrete patio. The sliding glass door leading into the kitchen was shattered, the safety glass lying on the ground in 1,000 tiny, sparkling green diamonds. Inside the kitchen, through the broken pane, Frankel could see a leg. It was wearing a pair of blue cotton slacks, and a white tennis shoe. "Stay back," Franco whispered to the deputies behind him. He drew his Glock 17, his thumb dropping the safety with a clean, metallic click. He stepped through the broken frame of the sliding door, his boots crunching on the glass. The kitchen was a war zone. The refrigerator door was open, its light shining on a floor covered in blood. It was everywhere, splattered across the white cabinets, smeared on the yellow wallpaper, and pooled in great, dark lakes on the linoleum. Angie Duff lay near the sink. She had not died quickly. Her hands were cut to the bone, the skin of her arms shredded from what appeared to be a desperate struggle against a knife. Her throat had been cut from ear to ear, the wound wide and gray. A few feet away, lying half in and half out of the hallway, was an elderly man. He was wearing a denim work shirt and khaki trousers. He had been shot 3 times in the chest, and his throat had also been cut, a deep, jagged wound that had nearly severed his head. "Lester," Duth whispered from behind Frankel. "That's Lester Lever." He was her companion. He lived over on the other side of town, but he spent most of his time here. "The blood is fresh," Frankel said, his voice cold. He knelt, touching the pool near Angie's hand. It was still warm. "This happened this morning, within the last hour or two." "He's still here," Silas said, his voice rising in panic. "He's still in the neighborhood." Act 2. The Escalation. Chapter 8. The Man in the Shadows. The neighborhood of Oak Street was locked down within 15 minutes. Every available unit from the Lyon County Sheriff's Department, the Washoe County Sheriff's Department, and the Nevada Highway Patrol was called to the scene. A SWAT team from Reno was dispatched, their black armored trucks roaring down I-80 with their sirens wailing. Frankel stood in the center of the intersection, a map of the subdivision spread across the hood of his patrol car. "He's on foot," Frankel said to the assembled officers. "He doesn't have a vehicle. Both of the Pape's cars are accounted for, and Alicia's truck is burned. He came here to get another car, but something went wrong. Angie and Lester fought him. If he's on foot, he's within a 4-block radius," Silas said. "There's nothing out here but fields and irrigation ditches, once you get past the houses." "Start house to house," Frankel ordered. "Check every shed, every garage, every crawl space. He's armed, he's desperate, and he has nothing left to lose. He's already killed 5 people." The search was a slow, grinding process. The afternoon heat had settled over the valley, the temperature reaching 90 degrees in the shade. The air was thick with the dust kicked up by the searchers' boots and the heavy, black exhaust of the armored vehicles. Frankel walked with a team of 4 SWAT officers down an alleyway behind Oak Street. The yards here were separated by chain-link fences, offering little cover. On his left, a large, silver-painted metal workshop stood behind a neat, green-painted ranch home. "Clear," an officer muttered as they passed a small wooden tool shed. Suddenly, a voice crackled through Frankel's radio. "We've got a resident on Cedar Street," the dispatcher said. 2 blocks south of your position. He says he hears something moving in the crawl space beneath his house. He's got a shotgun, and he's barricaded in his bedroom." "Moving now," Frankel said. He ran down the alley, his boots pounding on the dry dirt. The heat in his chest was a tight, burning knot, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The house on Cedar Street was a small, white-frame cottage, with a high crawlspace access door at the rear. 2 deputies were already in the yard, their rifles pointed at the small, square opening in the concrete foundation. "Did you see him?" Frankel asked as he ran up. "No," one of the deputies said, his face dripping with sweat. "But we heard him. He's he's scraping against the joists." Frankel knelt behind a large cottonwood tree, his gun pointed at the dark opening. "This is the sheriff's department," he yelled, his voice echoing in the small yard. "Come out with your hands up. We have the house surrounded." There was no answer, only the low, scraping sound of someone dragging themselves through the dry dirt beneath the floorboards. "SWAT's coming in," Silas said, running up behind him. "They're going to gas him." "No," Frankel said. "It's too tight under there. If he starts shooting, we won't see him until it's too late." He stood up and walked toward the side of the house, his back pressed against the white siding. He could hear the low, wet cough of a man who had inhaled too much dust. "I know you're under there," Frankel called out. "You don't want to die in the dirt. Come out." A hand appeared in the opening. It was not the hand of a monster. It was a small, pale hand, the fingers long and thin, covered in dry yellow clay. "Don't shoot," a voice called out from the dark. It was a high, thin voice, almost like a child's, but dry and cracked like the desert floor. "Don't shoot me." The voices. They told me to go down here. Chapter 9. The Unclean Road. The man who crawled out of the dirt was 5 feet, 8 inches tall, with a slight, almost fragile build that made him look younger than his 28 years. He was wearing a pair of blue jeans that had been cut off at the knees, his shins covered in thick, black mud and dried blood. His name was Jeremiah Bean. He had no shirt on, his pale chest marked by several long, red scratches from the greasewood bushes he had run through. His eyes were wide, blue, and glassy, their pupils dilated to the edge of his irises, despite the bright afternoon sun. He did not look like a killer. He looked like a stray dog that had been pulled from a canal shivering wet and smelling of old grease. 2 SWAT officers grabbed him by his arms, dragging him out onto the green grass of the lawn. They threw him on his face, his cheek pressing into the clover as they pulled his hands behind his back and clicked the cuffs into place. "Search him," Frankel said, his voice flat. They turned him over. In his pockets, they found 2 key fobs, one for Angie Duff's Toyota Corolla, the other for Lester Lever's Ford sedan. They also found a thick wad of cash, nearly $1,500, bound with a green rubber band. But there was no gun. "Where's the pistol, Jeremiah?" Frankel asked, kneeling beside him. Bean did not look at him. He was staring at the sky, his mouth open as if he were trying to catch the wind. "They're still talking," he whispered. "Who's talking?" "The people in the wall," Bean said, his voice rising in a thin, rhythmic sing-song. "They said to do it. They said if I didn't, the water would turn to salt. They said the old people had the gold." "He's running a game," Silas said, walking up and looking down at him with disgust. "He's trying to build an insanity defense before we even get him to the station." "Let's get him in the car," Frankel said. As they walked him toward the cruiser, the crowd of neighbors along the fence began to boo. A man in a stained work shirt stepped forward, his fist clenched, but a deputy pushed him back with a flat hand to the chest. "Why'd you do it, you piece of garbage?" the man yelled. "They never hurt nobody. Bobby would have given you the shirt off his back." Bean did not look at him. He kept his eyes on the dirt, his feet dragging in the grass, as if he had forgotten how to walk. Franco climbed into the front seat of his sedan, his hands shaking slightly as he started the engine. The air conditioning kicked on, blowing hot, stale air into his face before settling into a cool hum. "He's 44, Frankel said to Silas, who was sitting in the passenger seat. "What?" "The Papes. They were married 63 years. They had 5 miscarriages before they had their son. They lived in that house for 40 years. Silas looked out the window at the smoking ruins of the garage, and some kid with a .22 and a pocket full of junk shut it all down in 5 minutes. "Yeah," Frankel said, pulling away from the curb. "That's the logic of the highway." Chapter 10. The Anatomy of a Lie. The interrogation room at the Washoe County Sheriff's Office was 12 feet by 12 feet, with pale green concrete block walls and a single recessed light fixture that cast a flat, shadowless glare over the steel table in the center of the room. Jeremiah Bean sat in a metal chair, his ankles cuffed together and his wrists secured to a steel ring welded to the center of the table. He had been given a gray paper jumpsuit to replace his blood-soaked jeans, and he looked smaller in it, his narrow shoulders hunched forward like a bird with a broken wing. Frankel sat opposite him, a yellow legal pad and a cheap black ballpoint pen resting on the table between them. "You want something to drink, Jeremiah?" Frankel asked, his voice low and conversational. He had learned long ago that the best way to get a monster to talk was to treat him like a neighbor. Bean didn't look up. He was staring at his fingers, which were stained yellow around the nails from nicotine and cheap tobacco. The voices. "They don't like the water here. It tastes like copper." "We found the pistol," Jeremiah Frankel said, ignoring the bait. "A Ruger, target. It was in the bushes near the fence at Angie Duff's house. The ballistics matched the 3 rounds we took out of Alicia Graham's skull. They matched the rounds from Robert and Dorothy Papp." Bean's left eyelid twitched, a tiny, rapid flutter that lasted for 3 seconds before his face went flat again. "That wasn't my gun. That belonged to the man in the coat." "What man in the coat?" "The one who lives in the cellar," Bean said, his voice rising in a thin, rhythmic sing-song that sounded like a child reciting a nursery rhyme. "He has the white teeth. He told me that if I didn't go to the house, the crows would eat my eyes. He said the old people had the gold in the closet. Frankel let out a long, slow breath. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a photocopy of a document. He slid it across the table until it rested against Bean's cuffed wrists. "That's your arrest record from Las Vegas," Jeremiah Frankel said. 2 years ago, you got picked up for possession of a controlled substance, heroin. You went through a diversion program at the court there. The evaluator said you were cooperative, quiet, and possessed no history of mental illness. He said you were a standard user with a standard habit. Bean looked at the paper, his blue eyes blank. "You're not crazy," Jeremiah Frankel said, leaning forward until his face was only 18 inches from Bean's. "You're an addict who ran out of money. You've been staying with a friend in Fernley. And you watched the Papes because they were old and they lived at the end of the street where nobody could see the driveway. You thought they had money in the house." Bean didn't speak. The silence in the room grew thick, heavy with the smell of wet paper and the cold grease from Bean's hair. "You kicked the door in on Saturday night," Frankel continued. "Robert was in his chair. Dorothy was in the kitchen. You shot Dorothy first, didn't you? Because she was closer to the phone. Then Robert tried to get up, and you shot him in the chest. And then you walked over and put one in his temple while he was on the floor." Bean's jaw worked slowly, as if he were chewing on a piece of dry leather. "And then you stayed," Frankel said. "You stayed in that house for 2 days with those 2 dead people in the closet. You cooked their bacon. You slept in their bed. You used their shampoo to wash the blood out of your hair." A tiny smile appeared at the corner of Bean's mouth knot, a smile of pleasure, but a small, nervous twitch of the muscles. They had a nice TV, the big one, with the movie channels. In the corner of the room, Silas let out a soft, dry grunt that sounded like a curse. Act 3. The Shadows of the Flat. Chapter 11. The Cold Cognition. The confession, when it came, was not a flood, but a slow, cold leakage of detail that matched the physical evidence like a key in a lock. "I didn't have no money," Bean said, his voice flat and thin, devoid of any of the dramatic high-pitched nonsense he had used when they pulled him from the crawlspace. "My guy in Reno, he wouldn't give me nothing on tick. He said if I didn't have 300 by Sunday, he was going to send his brother down with a piece of pipe." "So you went to the Pape's house," Frankel said, his pen moving slowly across the yellow pad. "They was always there," Bean said. "I seen them at the grocery store. They had that nice white truck, and they didn't have no dogs. I hate dogs. They make too much noise." "What happened when you went inside?" "The door was old," Bean said. "I just kicked it right by the handle and it went right open." The old lady. She was standing by the stove. She didn't even scream. She just looked at me like she was going to ask me what I wanted. So I shot her. "Why did you shoot her if she wasn't screaming?" "She was going to," Bean said simply. "I could see it in her mouth. Her mouth went wide like this." He opened his own mouth in a grotesque, silent circle that lasted for a second before his face collapsed back into gray neutrality. Then the old man. He came out of the back room. He had a little wooden stick, one of them things you use to stir paint. He tried to hit me with it. He was real angry. "So you shot him too?" "Yeah. He fell down by the TV. I had to drag him because he was blocking the drawer where the silver was. He was heavy, real heavy." "And then you moved them to the closet?" Frankel asked. "The room smelled," Bean said. Like when you leave a pot of soup on the stove for a week. I didn't want to look at them while I was eating my toast. So I put them in the closet, and I piled all them blankets on top of them. It helped some, but then I had to use the shampoo on the carpet." "The shampoo," Frankel said. "They had 3 bottles of that herbal stuff in the bathroom," Bean said. "I just squeezed it all out on the floor where the blood was. It made the room smell like cherries. I liked it." "And the truck?" "I was going to go to Reno on Monday," Bean said. "But the white truck, it had a bad tire. It went flat near the exit. I didn't have no jack. I went over to the gas station to see if the guy had a jack." "Elicia Graham," Frankel said. "He was sitting in his little booth," Bean said. "He was reading the paper. I asked him if he had a jack, and he said he didn't have nothing for me. He said I looked like a doper. He was real mean about it." "So you killed him?" "He was going to call the cops," Bean said. He had his hand on the little black phone. I could see his fingers moving, so I shot him through the glass. Then I went inside and got his keys." "Why did you pull his clothes off, Jeremiah?" Frankel asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I didn't," Bean said, his eyes widening slightly in genuine confusion. He was lying in the dirt by the wheel. I tried to pull him out of the way so I could get the green truck out, and his pants just slid right off. The dirt was real dry, like sand. It just caught his trousers and pulled them down. I didn't care. I just wanted the truck. Frankel looked down at his notes. The details were all there, the cold, flat progression of a man who had killed 5 people for $84, a tank of gas, and a plate of bacon. There were no voices. There was no madness. There was only the dry, empty space where a human soul was supposed to be. That's all, Jeremiah Frankel said, standing up. That's all we need. Chapter 12. The Blood on the Glass. The trial of Jeremiah Bean began in November of 2013 in the historic courthouse in Louisville. The building sat on a low hill overlooking the town, its silver dome shining under the gray winter sky like an old coin. Inside, the courtroom was packed with people from Lyon and Washoe County's farmers in their clean denim coats, women from the church groups, and old miners who had worked with Robert Vance 30 years ago. They sat in absolute silence, their eyes fixed on the back of Bean's head. He sat at the defense table, his hair cut neat and his face clean-shaven, wearing a blue blazer that his public defender had bought for him at the JCPenney in Reno. He looked like a young man who might be starting his first year at the community college, his hands resting quietly on his knees. His attorney, a tall, intense woman named Sarah Van Snow, relation to the victim, stood before the jury, her voice ringing in the high ceiling. "This is not a case of cold-blooded murder, ladies and gentlemen," she said, her hand pointing toward Bean. "This is a case of a young mind that was shattered by disease. Jeremiah Bean was a victim of a profound, undiagnosed schizophrenic illness. He was living in a world of terror, a world where the voices of demons told him that he must kill or be killed. He did not know what he was doing." The prosecutor, a dry, gray-haired man named Miller who had been the district attorney for 25 years, didn't stand up. He sat at his table, his fingers tracing the edge of a manila folder. "We have the defendant's own words," Miller said, his voice flat and thin, but carrying to every corner of the room. "We have his description of the bacon he cooked in the Vape's kitchen. We have his description of the television programs he watched, while those 2 old people were rotting in the closet 2 feet away. He didn't kill because of voices. Ladies and gentlemen, he killed because he wanted to go to a strip club in Reno." The trial lasted 7 days. The jury did not look at Jeremiah when they came back into the room. They looked at the floor, or at the high, arched windows where the winter snow was beginning to drift against the glass. "Guilty," the foreman said. He was an alfalfa farmer from the South Valley, his face dark and lined from 40 years under the sun. "Guilty on all 5 counts of first-degree murder." When the judge asked Jeremiah if he had anything to say before the sentence was passed, the young man stood up, his blue eyes blank. "I just wanted to say that. The truck, the green one, it had a bad pull to the left," Bean said, his voice conversational. "I think the alignment was out. If the man had fixed the alignment, I wouldn't have gone off the road." The Georgia man who had known Robert and Dorothy Vance for 40 years did not flinch. He read from a printed sheet of paper, his hands steady. "You shall be taken to the state prison at Carson City," the judge said, "and there, in a manner prescribed by law, you shall be put to death." Bean sat back down. He did not look at his attorney. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small piece of gray paper, and began to fold it into a tiny, neat square. Act 4. The Long Desolation. Chapter 13. 3 years after the trial, the wind was still blowing off the Carson sink, carrying the dry, gray dust of the Alkali Flats across the highway. Dave Frankel stood by the roadside at the Mustang exit, his canvas jacket zipped to his chin against the winter draft. The Texaco station was completely gone now. The canopy had been taken down, leaving only the 3 concrete islands where the pumps had been, the rusted iron pipes sticking out of the cement like broken fingers. A small wooden cross had been set into the dirt near the guardrail where Alicia Graham had been found. It was decorated with a few plastic flowers that had already faded to a dull, chalky pink under the high desert sun. Frankel knelt, his boots sliding in the loose gravel, and cleared away a clump of dry Russian thistle that had caught on the wood. "He's still there, Dave," a voice said. He turned. Ellie Graham was standing on the gravel's shoulder, her hands tucked into her sleeves, her face pale and thin under a blue wool cap. "They're still appealing it," she said. "The lawyers in San Francisco say it wasn't fair because of his head. They say we didn't have enough doctors. Look at him." The doctors looked at him, Ellie Frankel said, standing up and brushing the gray dust from his knees. They said he was just mean. There's no medicine for that. Angry is what it makes me, she said, her voice dropping until it was nearly lost in the rattle of a passing truck. When people say there's good in everyone, I want to take a hammer to their head. There wasn't no good in him, Dave. Not a drop. Franca looked out over the river, where the green water was slow and thick with ice along the banks. In his 30 years of law enforcement, he had closed 84 murder cases. He had seen men kill for love, for money, for anger, and for fear. But he had never seen anything like Jeremiah Bina, man who had moved through the valley like a cold draft, leaving nothing behind but the smell of cheap shampoo and the sound of dry wind through the sagebrush. He won't come back, Ellie, Frankel said. No, she said, looking at the small white cross, but we're still here, and the road's still open. Frankel didn't answer. He turned and walked back to his car, his boots clicking on the cold asphalt, leaving the small cross to face the wind alone. Chapter 14. The Grey Valley. The road from Reno to Lovelock is a line of grey asphalt that has no end. It runs through the salt flats and the dry hills, past the ghost stations and the abandoned mines. A silent corridor where the only life is the passage of the big diesel rigs moving from coast to coast. In the winter of 2017, the snow was deep in the Humboldt Range, the white slopes standing out sharp and cold against the dark blue sky. Raymond Silas stood on the porch of his house on 12th Street, his hands wrapped around a cup of hot coffee. He had retired from the sheriff's office a year before, but he still woke at 5 every morning, his mind turning over the old cases like stones in a dry creek bed. The telephone inside the house rang the clean, electronic beep of a new line. He went inside and picked up the receiver. Silas. Raymond, it's Marty Duth, the voice said. Duth was retired now too, living in a small place near the lake in Fallon. I just got a call from the prison. They denied the final appeal on Bean. They're setting the date for spring. Silas looked out the window at the grey garden where his wife had planted some winter cabbage that had already frozen in the ground. Does the family know? Ellie knows. She said she's going to go down to Carson to watch. She wants to see him close his eyes. I don't think I'll go, Silas said. I've seen enough of him. Yeah, Duth said. We all did. Silas hung up the phone. He walked back out onto the porch, his boots making a soft, dry squeak on the painted wood. The wind had come up again, blowing from the east, carrying the scent of the salt flats and the dry sage. It was the same wind that had blown on the morning of May 13th, wind that didn't care about the 5 dead people in the closet or the young man who had killed them for $84. In the high desert, the land is too big for mercy. It accepts the dead the same way it accepts the dust and the dry wood, turning them into grey salt before the spring can come. Silas drank his coffee, his eyes fixed on the distant mountains, waiting for the sun to rise behind the white peaks. Act V. The Final Chronicle. Chapter 15. The Chronology of the Sink. The history of Silver County is written in dry silt and the receipts of defunct land companies. Between 1950 and 2010, the valley had lost 3/4 of its population, the small farms along the Humboldt River Canal dying off. As the water rights were sold to the cities to the west, what remained was a landscape of skeleton towns settlements like Black Rock, where the only active businesses were a post office that opened 3 days a week, and a single pump gas station that sold low-grade diesel to hay haulers. The people who stayed were those who had nowhere else to go, or those who had lived there so long that the wind had become a necessary part of their breathing. On the morning of March 4, 2018, the state of Nevada carried out the execution of Jeremiah Bean at the maximum security facility in Carson City. There were only 8 people in the observation room, 3 journalists from the Reno newspapers, the district attorney from Lyon County, and 4 members of the victims' families, including Ellie Graham and the Vance's son, Robert Jr. Raymond Silas sat in his car in the parking lot outside the prison gate, his window rolled down 2 inches to let in the smell of the damp pine needles from the Sierra Hill. The execution was quiet. There were no speeches, no final statements of madness or remorse. Bean lay on the gurney with his eyes open, staring at the white acoustic tiles of the ceiling, his small, pale face looking no different than it had on the afternoon. They pulled him from the dirt beneath the porch on Cedar Street. When the needle went in, his chest rose once, a short, sharp gasp that sounded like a man who had stepped into a cold lake. Then his face went gray, the color of a wet slate shingle, and his eyes stayed fixed on the ceiling until the doctor stepped forward with a stethoscope. He's dead, Silas said to himself, though there was no one in the car to hear him. He put the sedan in gear and turned back toward the highway. The road from Carson City to Lovelock is 85 miles of dry blacktop that runs through the pass and down into the sink. As Silas drove, the mountains on either side of the highway began to lose their snow, the white peaks turning gray and then yellow under the pale spring sun. By the time he reached the Black Rock exit, the wind had come back around to the north, carrying the cold, clean scent of the sagebrush that had died long before the irrigation ditches went dry. He didn't stop at he didn't look at the small wooden cross by the guardrail. He drove past the pink-painted buildings of the Mustang Ranch, past the green steel bridge, and down into the wide, gray valley where the dust was already beginning to rise from the dry flats, turning the road ahead into a long, white screen that had no end. Chapter 16. The Logic of the Wind. The files of the Washoe County Sheriff's Office are stored in gray, cardboard boxes in the archive room under the courthouse in Reno. Box of 13th of May 2013 contains 300 pages of typed reports, 54 color photographs of bloodstains on yellow wallpaper, a copy of Jeremiah Bean's confession, and a small plastic bag containing a single, bone-handled kitchen knife with a dark, dried crust along the edge of the blade. There is no entry in the file for the voices. There is no record of the man in the coat, or the people in the walls, or the black crows that were supposed to eat the boy's eyes if he didn't get the gold. On a Tuesday afternoon in the summer of 2020, Detective Dave Franklino, 5 years retired, walked down the steps of the courthouse into the bright, hot sun of the Reno street. He was 70 years old now, his knees stiff from arthritis, his hands spotted with the same sunsores that had marked the face of Alicia Graham. He stood by the river for a long time, watching the green water move over the rocks near the bridge, his mind empty of the names and the dates that had filled his notebooks for 30 years. A young man in a blue suit passed him, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice loud and quick as he talked about some land deal in Sparks. Frankel didn't look at him. He looked at the water. In the end, the road is the only thing that remains. The trucks will keep moving east, their silver sides catching the sun like a long, bright needle, sewing the earth together. The wind will keep scraping the hills, carrying the salt and the alkali dust across the asphalt, wearing away the paint on the fence posts, and the memory of the 5 people who died for $84. And the desert will stay the same white, dry, and silent under the wide, pale sky, waiting for the next traveler whose tank runs dry before the dawn. Activate the ghost of the road. Chapter 17. The Ghost Station. The station at Black Rock did not burn, it simply fell apart. By the winter of 2022, the roof had collapsed entirely, the gray shingles lying in a wet heap over the remains of the counter where Alicia Graham had kept his ledger. The 3 pump islands were covered in a thick growth of Russian thistle, their rusted iron pipes standing out from the concrete like the bones of an old hand. A lone traveler man from Salt Lake, who had taken the wrong turn at the pass, stopped his track on the gravel apron to check his map. The wind was blowing off the sink, a cold, scraping draft that smelled of salt and old grease. He walked toward the ruins of the office, his boots crunching on the dry gravel. On the ground near the door lay a small, green plastic bottle, its label faded to a pale, chalky white by 10 years of sun and snow. He picked it up. It was empty, but when he unscrewed the cap, the faint, chemical scent of cheap lavender rose from the plastic, thin and sweet in the cold air. He threw the bottle back into the weeds and climbed into his truck, his engine starting with a heavy, diesel roar that shook the old timbers of the canopy. He did not look back as he pulled onto the highway, his tires kicking up a small cloud of white dust that hung in the still air, behind him like a ghost waiting for the road to clear. Chapter 18. The End of the File. In the final year of his life, Raymond Silas did not leave his house on 12th Street. He sat on the porch in his yellow vinyl chair, his legs wrapped in the wool blanket that had belonged to his sister Miriam, watching the wind move through the dead cottonwood trees by the ditch. He had forgotten the names of the district attorneys. He had forgotten the names of the judges and the reporters who had stood at the barricades on Oak Street. But he still remembered the smell of the master bedroom in the Papes' house. He still remembered the way the lavender shampoo had looked on the gray carpet, dried in 2 long white swirls that looked like the tracks of some small, blind animal that had spent its life crawling through the dark under the floor. Raymond, his wife, called from the kitchen. He did not answer. He was watching a white truck move along the bypass 3 miles to the north, its headlights tiny, pale dots of light against the dark blue wall of the mountains. The truck moved slowly, its engine a low, distant hum that sounded like the river when the water was low. It reached the junction, turned west toward the pass, and disappeared into the shadows of the canyon, leaving nothing behind but the gray sky and the cold, flat desolation of the flats. Silas closed his eyes, his chin sinking toward his chest, his hands still and cold on the wool blanket as the wind came down from the mountains, bringing the first snow of the long, dark winter. Act 7. The Silent Land. Chapter 19. The Salt Flat Reckoning. The valley does not keep records of its grief. To the east of Fernley, where the canal turns toward the marsh, there is a stretch of white clay that has been dry since the Pleistocene. The local boys call it the Dead Man's Sink, though nobody remembers which dead man the name refers to. It is a flat, featureless plain of gray silt that looks like the surface of a cold star, parallel ruts left by the wagons of the emigrants who passed through in 1849. If you stand in the center of the sink at noon, the heat is a physical weight, pressing down on your shoulders until your breath comes short and dry in your throat. Dave Frankl's old partner, Silas Cole, died in the spring of 2024. His funeral was held in the small chapel behind the high school in London, the same chapel where they had held the services for Robert and Dorothy Vance 11 years before. There were only 12 people in the pews, 3 retired deputies, 2 cousins from Fallon, and an old woman who lived next door to the church and came to all the services because she liked the sound of the organ. Frankel sat in the back row, his hands resting on his wooden cane, his eyes fixed on the simple pine casket. The preacher, a young man who had come from Ohio 3 years ago and still spoke with a soft, polite accent that didn't belong to the valley, spoke of peace and mercy. He spoke of a land where there was no more hunger, no more thirst, and where the tears would be wiped from every eye. Frankel didn't listen. He knew what lay beyond the valley. He knew that the only thing waiting for Silas Cole was the same dry dirt that had taken Alicia Graham and Lester Lever, a dirt that didn't care about peace or mercy, that only knew how to absorb the water and the blood until they were both gone. When the service was over, he walked out into the graveyard behind the chapel. The headstones were old, many of them made of local limestone that had been carved by hand. The letters worn away by 70 years of sandstorms until they looked like gray fingers sticking out of the weeds. He found the Vance plot in the corner near the canal fence. The stone was simple gray granite, with the names Robert and Dorothy carved in block letters, and below them, the single line, "Together in the Lord." They were 84, Dave Silas Cole had said to him on the night they found them. They had 5 minutes. They lived in that house 40 years. Franco touched the cold granite of the stone with his bare hand. The stone was warm from the sun, but it felt thin, like a piece of cardboard that had been left in the rain. "There wasn't no gold, Bobby," Franco whispered to the grave. "There wasn't nothing but $84 and some plated rings." He turned and walked back to his wagon, his boots heavy in the dry clover. As he drove east toward Wadsworth, the sun was beginning to drop behind the peaks of the Virginia range, turning the sagebrush into long, purple shadows that stretched across the highway like a row of fingers pointing toward the sink. He did not turn on the radio. He did not look at the mirror. He drove with his hands steady on the wheel, his eyes fixed on the white line of the road ahead, where the dust was already beginning to drift across the blacktop like snow. Chapter 20. The Last Cold Insight. The files of the Washoe County Sheriff's Office do not change. Every 10 years, they are moved to a different room in the basement. They are cardboard boxes marked with new blue labels that show the decade and the district. But the contents remain the same. The typed statements, the black and white diagrams of the bedrooms, and the small, clear plastic bags containing the bullets and the lead fragments that were taken from the bone. In 2025, a young detective named Millionaire, grandson of the deputy who had stood at the barricades on Oak Street, was assigned to review the old cold cases in the county archives. He found box the 13th of May 2013 near the back of the shelf, behind a row of tax records from the 1980s. He sat at the wooden table in the archive room, the fluorescent lights buzzing above his head with that same low, vibrating B-flat that had made his grandfather's teeth ache 40 years ago. He opened the manila folder and pulled out the photograph of Jeremiah Bean. The boy in the picture was 28 years old, but his face was smooth and white, his hair light and clean as a schoolboy's. He was looking at the camera with an expression that was neither angry nor afraid, an expression that looked like he was waiting for the photographer to finish so he could go back to his television. Miller turned the photograph over. On the back, His grandfather had written a single line in black grease pencil. "There is no good in this boy." Miller looked at the photograph for a long time. He had spent 5 years in law enforcement, working the night shifts along the interstate corridor, and he had seen the usual run of dopers and husbands who had lost their tempers on a Saturday night. He knew how to talk to them. He knew how to make them feel like he was their friend. But, as he looked at Jeremiah Bean's clear blue eyes, he felt a cold, dry draft come under the door of the archive room, a draft that smelled of lavender shampoo and old grease. He slid the photograph back into the folder, tied the green string around the cardboard box, and set it back on the shelf behind the tax records. He did not write a report. He did not make any notes on his pad. He walked up the concrete steps into the warm, yellow light of the Reno afternoon, his windbreaker unzipped, his hands in his pockets, as he walked toward the river. The water was low, green, and thick with summer moss. Its current slow as it moved past the pink-painted walls of the old brothel and down into the gray valley, where the dust was already beginning to rise from the dry flats, turning the road ahead into a long, white screen that had no end. Chapter 21. The Ghost Road Remembers. The interstate does not sleep. Even in the deep winter, when the snow is 6 feet deep on the pass, and the big trucks have to put on their chains at the state line, the road remains open. The double tankers and the flatbeds move through the canyon in a long, continuous line, their yellow clearance lights reflecting off the white walls of the snowdrifts like a string of gold beads. At the Mustang exit, the wind is always the same. It comes down through the notches of the mountains, dry and cold, carrying the salt from the dry lake and the sand from the gravel pits. It sweeps across the concrete islands of the old Texaco station, lifting the dry willow leaves and the pieces of paper that have fallen from the dumpsters, turning them over and over in the dirt until they are worn away to gray dust. The small wooden cross near the guardrail is gone now. It was struck by a snowplow in the winter of 2026. Its white-painted timber splintered into 3 pieces that were carried down into the river wash by the spring runoff. No one came to replace it. Ellie Graham had died in her trailer in Wadsworth 2 years before, and her sister Miriam had moved to a senior facility in Boise, where there was no wind and the water didn't taste of lime. But the road remembers. In the late-night hours, when the highway is quiet and the only sound is the low hum of the high-pressure sodium lights under the canopy, a green truck will sometimes stop on the shoulder near the bridge. The driver's side door will swing back against the hinge, and a man will step out into the gravel, his boots sliding slightly in the loose sand. He will stand by the guardrail for a minute, looking down into the dark gully where the willow brush grows, his hands in his pockets, his face pale and gray in the yellow light of the lamps. He will not call out. He will not make any sound. He will just stand there, watching the way the wind catches the dry sagebrush on the hill, until a westbound truck passes on the bridge above, its tires singing on the concrete, its heavy, dark shape swallowing his shadow, as it moves down into the gray valley where the lights of the city are already beginning to fade into the dawn. Part 1. The Chronicle of the Cold Sink. Chapter 1. The Wind at Blackwell. The high desert wind did not blow. It scraped. It came off the dry, alkaline beds of the Humboldt Sink, carrying the scent of parched rabbit brush, sulfur springs, and the flat, bitter smell of 90-octane gasoline from the lonely pumps at Red Cut. Here some 30 miles east of Reno where the interstate cut along, dark groove through pale clay hills. The land was too vast for the small lives scattered across it. Under the white glare of early summer, the mountains looked like heaps of salt and ash, dry and old beyond calculation. It was exactly 7:12 on the morning of May 13th, when the rhythm of the highway began to slip. Marcia Longfellow stood on the cracked asphalt apron of the Red Cut service station, her fingers curled around a paper cup of black coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. She was 51 years old, with the dry, wind-toughened skin of a woman who had spent 3 decades under the high Nevada sun. Her gray-streaked hair was pulled back into a tight, practical braid that lay flat against her collar. "Elia," she called out. The wind took the name and scattered it across the lanes of asphalt. The only answer was the rhythmic, hollow clink-clink-clink of the brass snap on the flag halyard hitting the rusted steel pole near the kerosene tank. Elia Popeye Graham was a man who lived by an internal, iron-wound clock. He was 51 years old, possessed a left eye that sat slightly lower than his right from some old boyhood horseplay, and kept 4 separate part-time jobs across 2 county lines. He threw the morning editions of the Valley Gazette, He swept the grease bays at the agro. He stacked pallets at the drywall plant, and he kept the graveyard shift at the red-cut pumps. He was the kind of man who slept in 3-hour increments, lived on cold mutton, grease, and chicory, and was regarded by everyone between the sink and the canyon as a permanent fixture of the highway, as reliable as the green milepost markers. Ellie, Marsha walked toward the side of the concrete block building where the water spigot was. The gravel under her boots was damped with the morning's thin frost, which would vanish into gray steam before 100 yards north, where the sand-drifted dirt of the old railroad spur branched off into the scrub. She noticed something pale caught in the thorns of a greasewood bush. She walked closer, her boots sinking an inch into the soft silt of the ditch. The white shapes were newspapers, dozens of them. The Tuesday morning edition of the Gazette, still bundled in their yellow plastic twine but torn open, their pages fluttering in the low branches like giant, dead moths. And then she saw the boots. They were heavy, black work boots with thick vulcanized soles, sticking out from behind a hummock of rabbit brush. The trousers, blue denim, stiff with grease and dried sweat, were bunched down around the ankles in a heavy, twisted ring. The legs above them were pale, the color of lard, and hairless. Marsha stopped. She did not scream. Screaming in this country was a waste of breath that could be used for running or fighting. She set her coffee cup down on a flat rock at the edge of the ditch and took 3 slow, deliberate steps forward. The torso was bare, the gray-flecked hair of the chest matted with dry sand and something darker, a crust, the color of dried prunes. Elia Graham's head was turned toward the gravel, his crooked mouth slightly open, showing the yellow line of his lower teeth. Behind his left ear, where the skull joined the neck, were 3 small, dark holes. They did not look like bullet wounds. They looked like the work of some large, neat beetle that had bored into the bone to find the grease inside. "Oh, Popeye," she whispered. The wind took her words and carried them away over the low hills toward the interstate, where the big rigs were already beginning to gear down for the long climb toward the pass. Chapter 2. The Undercover Mind. The office of the Washoe County Sheriff in Reno smelled of floor wax, wet wool, and old ink. It was an old building, constructed in the 50s when the valley was still mostly alfalfa fields and cattle pens, and its windows did not open. Detective David Silas sat at a desk that had been salvaged from an insurance office in Elko 30 years before. He was 48, with the heavy, sloping shoulders of an ex-college lineman, and a face that looked as though it had been carved out of a dry pine, not with a dull knife. His eyes were small, pale blue, and largely devoid of what the local papers called human warmth. Silas had spent 20 years looking at the things people did to one another when they thought the dark was thick enough to hide them. He had spent his early years in undercover narcotics, living in the motels along 4th Street, learning the language of the people who lived in the margins. He knew that most criminals were not clever. They were simply heavy, slow, and prone to sudden, violent movements when cornered. His partner, Detective Marcus Croft, a younger man who still wore shirts that required an iron and kept his boots shined, was looking at a map of the county. "We got a name on the body at the Red Cut exit," Croft said, not looking up from the blue line sheet. Elia Graham, 51, worked the night shift at the pumps. Silas was cleaning his fingernails with the small blade of a folding knife. He did not look up. "I know him. He had a brother who lived in the trailers behind the lime plant in Lovelock. Frank." The brother is a bastard," Silas said simply. He closed the knife with a dry click. "They've been trying to kill each other since the bicentennial, over an irrigation ditch, or a dead mule. No one remembers which." "We have a report from 3 weeks back," Croft said, flipping through a thin manila folder. "Frank tried to put his Chrysler over Elia's legs in the parking lot of the hardware store in Love. Elia wouldn't sign the complaint, said he'd handle it with a spade." "Let's go talk to Frank," Silas said, rising from his chair. "He's probably still got the rust on his bum." They drove out in Silas's personal car, a faded green sedan that smelled of stale tobacco and wet retriever. The road out to the lime plant was 5 miles of washboard dirt that rattled the teeth in their socks. On either side, the sagebrush stood like old men waiting for a train that had been cancelled in 1950. The trailers behind the plant were 6 silver cylinders that looked like they had been dropped from a great height and left to rot where they fell. Frank Graham's unit was the 3rd one, its metal skin patched with tar paper and silver tape. When Silas knocked on the door, it didn't swing open so much as it shuddered. Frank Graham stood in the opening. He was 70, with a chest like a beer barrel and a beard that looked like it had been scrubbed with coal dust. He was wearing an oil-stained undershirt and held a half-inch box wrench in his right hand. "He's dead, Frank," Silas said before the older man could speak. Frank looked at Silas, then at Croft, then down at the wrench. His hand didn't shake, but the muscle under his jaw gave a quick, lateral twitch. "Which one?" Frank asked. "Ellie." Frank spat onto the dry dirt of the step. "The lucky one, then." "We need to know where you were last night between midnight and 4, Croft said, stepping forward with his notebook open. He had the bright, eager look of a dog that hadn't yet been kicked by a mule. Frank looked at him with immense historical contempt. "I was in the cab of a Kenworth between Salt Lake and Wells. You little clerk. You want the logbook? Go ask the dispatcher at the coop. He's got the stamps." Silas watched Frank's eyes. They were clear, angry, and dry. A man who has spent 20 years hating his brother does not look like this when he finally kills him. He looks relieved, or he looks frightened. Frank just looked like his truck had a bad transmission. "We'll need to see the log, Frank," Silas said softly. "See whatever the hell you want," Frank snarled, slamming the door. The trailer groaned on its cinderblock jacks. Silas turned back toward the car. It wasn't Frank. "How do you know?" Croft asked, struggling to keep his boots clean in the soft dust. "He hated him." "Hate his work," Silas said, sliding behind the wheel. "Frank's too old for that kind of lifting. Besides, Frank would have used a tire iron and done it in the middle of the road so everyone could see. 3 small holes behind the ear. That's not a feud. That's a chore." Chapter 3. The Cow County Line. By 9 in the morning, the wind had died down to a hot, dry breathing that smelled of wild onion. Silas stood by the ditch at Red Cut, watching the deputy coroner, a man named Wefano, who had spent 30 years examining the dead of Washoe County, turn Elia Graham's head with 2 gloved fingers. 3 rounds, Wefano said, probably a pistol. Given the lack of powder burns on the collar line, he was shot from behind while he was either kneeling or leaning over. No defensive marks on the palms. No sand under the nails. "And the pants?" Silas asked. "Pulled down by someone else," Wefano said, letting the head settle back into the gray silt. "Look at the drag marks on the heels." His heels plowed 2 neat furrows in the dirt for about 20 feet. "If he'd walked out here himself to take a leak or meet someone, we'd have footprints." "We have his heels dragging. His shirt pulled up over his shoulders, and his trousers bunched at the ankles. Someone caught him by the collar and hauled him out of the light. His wallet's still in his coat," Croft said from the edge of the asphalt. $42. A receipt for a fan belt from the NAPA. In Sparks. A library card. "So it's not a robbery," Silas said. "Not for $40, Croft said. "But his truck's gone. The red Ford." "He had a red Ford." "An 88, Croft said. "Dented tailgate. White passenger door." Silas looked down at the highway. A mile to the west, the exit sign for the Mustang Ranch to Famous. Yellow-painted brothel that sat on the bend of the Truckee River gleamed in the sun. It was a place that had drawn the unsavory element to the valley for 50 years. A marker for travelers who wanted to lose their money or their names. "You think he went down there?" Croft asked. "Ellie didn't have the money for the Mustang," Silas said. "And if he had, he wouldn't have gone in his work clothes. He was a Methodist. He didn't even like people who used butter on their bread." Before Croft could answer, the radio in Silas's green sedan began to wail. It was the high, warbling tone used only when the dispatcher had more than one line of trouble on the board. Silas walked back to the car, his boots crunching on the gravel, and reached through the open window for the handset. "Silas." "David," the dispatcher said. Her voice was too fast, the syllables clipping together. "We got a call from the Lyon County side, Sheriff's office in Yerington. They have a vehicle matching your missing Ford." "Where?" "In a ditch about 400 yards from the river road in Fernley," she said. "But there's a wrinkle." "What's the wrinkle, Jean?" "The plates on the truck in the ditch don't match the Ford," she said. "They come back to a blue 92 Chevrolet registered to an Arthur Peak. Address is River Street, Fernley." Silas looked back at Wefano, who was currently wrapping Elia Graham's hands in brown paper bags to preserve any trace evidence. "And where's Arthur Peak?" "Lyon County went to the River Street house to ask him about his truck," Jean said. "The house is currently on fire." Chapter 4. The Blackened Shingles. Fernley sat in the crook of the river, 20 miles south of the interstate, a town of small, square bungalows built during the railway boom of the 20s and the alfalfa boom of the late 50s. The streets were wide and lined with cottonwood trees that had been planted by the first homesteaders to keep the houses from blowing into the sink. When Silas and Croft crossed the county line, the smoke from River Street was already visible, a thin, oily column of black that rose straight into the windless sky. The Peak House was a low, gray-painted bungalow with a green composition roof, or what remained of it. The roof had collapsed into the kitchen, leaving only the soot-blackened rafters pointing toward the sky like the ribs of a dead horse. A yellow volunteer fire truck was parked on the lawn, its pump motor churning with a flat, wet thrum, while two men in yellow turnout coats sprayed water into the garage. Marty Dews, the detective for the Lyon County Sheriff's Department, was standing by the mailbox. He was a short, thick-set man of 50, with a mustache that had been stained yellow by 30 years of tobacco and a pair of eyes that always looked as though they were searching for a lost horse. "We got the fire out in the garage," Dews said as Silas got out of the sedan. He didn't offer his hand. They had known each other for 15 years, since the time they had pulled 3 drowned miners out of the siphon at the Derby Dam. "There's a truck in there, burned to the frame, but it's not Peak's." Silas smelled the air. It was the greasy, sweet stink of burning plastics and rubber, mixed with the unmistakable smell of wet, scorched pine. "That's what the frame looks like," Dews said. "We ran the number on the engine block before the water cooled it down. Registered to your guy Graham. And where's Arthur Peak?" "That's what we're trying to find out," Dews said. "The neighbors say he and Martha don't go anywhere without each other. They've been married 63 years. Arthur was in Korea. Drywall finisher. If his truck's in your county and Graham's truck is in his garage, we've got something very sour here." "The firemen cleared the house?" Silas asked, looking at the steaming ruins of the kitchen. "They did a quick run through the front room," Dude said there was no one in the beds, but they didn't go in the back. The ceiling was coming down. "Let's go," Silas said. They found a pair of rubber boots in the back of Dews's car and walked up the gravel driveway. The water from the fire hoses had mixed with the gray silt of the yard, creating a slick, ankle-deep mud that smelled of soot and old fertilizer. The kitchen was a total loss. The linoleum had melted into a black, bubbling crust that stuck to the soles of their boots, and the copper plumbing under the sink had warped into strange, brassy knots. On the counter, miraculously untouched by the flames, but coated in a thin layer of gray soot, sat a cast-iron skillet containing 6 strips of bacon. The fat had gone cold and white around the meat, and 2 slices of white bread sat in the toaster, the lever not yet pushed down. "They were getting ready for breakfast," Croft said, his voice quiet under the dripping water of the rafters. "No," Silas said, pointing with his flashlight to a small, plastic radio that sat on the windowsill. The dial was set to the local agricultural station, but the plastic casing had melted into a green tear. "They were getting ready for breakfast 3 days ago. Look at the bacon. It's dry. The grease has gone yellow. This fire didn't start this morning." "The call came in at 5:30, Dews said. "He said it this morning," Silas said, his eyes moving across the soot-covered floor. "But he'd been here since Friday. He's been living in their house." Chapter 5. The Smell of Coconut. They moved into the master bedroom, where the heat had been less intense. The walls were gray with soot, but the wallpaper, a pattern of faded pink roses, was still visible beneath the film. The bed had been stripped of its sheets and blankets, leaving only the bare, blue-striped mattress. On the carpet near the foot of the bed, Silas's flashlight caught a series of white, glistening trails, strange, looping squiggles that looked like some giant snail had crawled across the wool. Silas knelt down, his knee joints cracking in the quiet of the room. He touched the white substance with his bare finger and brought it to his nose. "What is it?" Croft asked. "Shampoo," Silas said. "Cheap stuff, scented like coconut." He squeezed the whole bottle out onto the floor. "Why?" "To hide the smell," Silas said, rising. "A house with 2 bodies in it gets heavy after 48 hours, even in May, especially when you're keeping the heat on to cook your bacon." He walked toward the back of the room, where a small walk-in closet sat behind a pair of sliding mirrored doors. The mirrors had cracked from the heat, the glass webbed with thousands of silver lines that reflected his face in a dozen different pieces. Silas pushed the door aside. The closet was small, smelling of mothballs, cedar, and old wool. Arthur Peak's Sunday suits, 3 of them, gray and brown, bought from the J.C. Penney in Reno 20 years before, hang neatly from the wooden pole. But on the floor, Beneath the hanging hemlines was a massive, disordered heap of clothing. It looked as though someone had pulled every drawer from the walnut dresser in the corner and dumped the contents into a pile to hide something. Silas reached down and pulled away a heavy, green wool blanket. Beneath it was a hand. It was small, the skin translucent and yellow like old lard, the fingers slightly curled as if they were waiting to hold a cup. On the third finger was a thin, worn band of yellow gold that had grown into the flesh over half a century. David Dews said from the doorway. "I see her," Silas said. They worked for 20 minutes in the close, hot space of the closet, their hands turning gray with the soot that had drifted under the door. Arthur Peake lay on his back beneath a pile of Martha's summer dresses. He was wearing his work trousers and a flannel shirt, his eyes half open. Martha lay beside him, her head tucked into the hollow of his shoulder, as if she had gone to sleep there during a cold snap. Both had been shot once in the back of the skull, .22 caliber, no powder burns. They didn't even know he was in the house, Dews said, his voice shaking slightly as he looked at the old man's face. Arthur was deaf in his left ear. From the drywall guns, he wouldn't have heard the lock go. "He didn't break the lock," Silas said, pointing to the bedroom window. The glass was whole, the latch still turned to the side. He walked in through the kitchen, probably told them his truck had broken down on the river road. Arthur would have given him a cup of coffee. He was that kind of old man. Silas walked out of the bedroom and stood in the ruin of the kitchen. He looked at the skillet again. "He killed them on Friday night," Silas said. "Then he stayed here. He ate their bread. He used their soap. He probably watched their television until the screen went gray. And then, when the smell got too bad, he took Arthur's blue truck and went back to the highway to find another one." "Why did he go back?" Croft asked, his face white. "Because the blue truck ran out of gas," Silas said. "Or because he wanted to see the water. Monsters don't have plans, markers. They just have directions." Chapter 6. The Golden Anniversary. The daughter of Arthur and Martha Peake arrived at 11 o'clock. Her name was Evelyn, and she lived 3 miles north on the Canal Road, where her husband ran a small alfalfa press. She did not get out of her car at first. She sat behind the wheel of her old station wagon, her hands gripped so tightly on the plastic rim that her knuckles showed white through the dust. When Silas walked down the driveway toward her, she rolled the window down 2 inches. "They're inside?" she asked. "They're inside, Evelyn," Silas said. He had known her when she was a girl, back when the high school had only 80 pupils and the football field was nothing but sand and dirt. "I was coming over to bring them some of the strawberry jam," she said. She looked past Silas at the yellow fire truck. "It's their anniversary on Thursday. 63 years. We had a cake ordered from the bakery in Sparks, with the little silver bells on the top." "I'm sorry, Evelyn." "Who did it, David?" she asked, her voice dropping to a whisper that was almost lost in the idle of her engine. "Was it one of those boys from the highway? The ones who sleep under the bridge?" "We don't know yet," Silas said, "but we're going to find him." "Arthur had a pistol," she said. "An old Colt. He kept it in the drawer with his socks. He said if anyone ever came through the window, he'd put them in the canal." "The sock drawer's gone, Evelyn," Silas said. "Everything's gone." She looked at him for another long second, her eyes dry and hard as the stones in the ditch, and then she rolled the window up and sat there in the heat, watching the men in the yellow coats drag the black hoses across her mother's dandelion patch. Part 2. The High Spray. Chapter 7. By 11:30, the wind had returned, carrying the gray dust from the lime plant across the highway, until the sun looked like a brass button. Silas and Dews were standing by the mailbox at the Peake house, their maps spread out on the hood of the green sedan, when the radio inside the car began to crackle again. This time, the voice did not belong to the Washoe Dispatch. It was the Lyon County Sheriff himself, a man named Henderson who had spent 30 years in the basin and knew every irrigation lateral by its first name. "Marty, you there?" Dews reached through the window and took the mic. "I'm here, Sheriff. Silas is with me." "We got a call from the Miller place," Henderson said. His voice was flat, the tone of a man who had already decided what he was going to do and didn't want any argument. 2 blocks north of you, on the river road." "What's the trouble?" "The neighbor, Angela Duff," the sheriff said. "She's 90. She volunteers at the senior center every Monday morning at 10. She didn't show today. Her neighbor went over to check the house. He says the back window is broken out and there's glass all over the porch." Dews looked at Silas. "We're on our way," Dews said. They didn't use the sirens. In a town like Fernley, a siren was a dinner bell for every curious retired rail worker within 5 miles. They drove the 2 blocks north on the river road, their tires crunching slowly in the dry sand of the shoulder, and parked under a giant cottonwood tree that grew near the ditch. Angela Duff's house was a neat, white-painted cottage, with green shutters and a small porch where 2 wicker chairs sat facing the road. The yard was fenced with white paint, and a large bed of red geraniums grew along the foundation, their petals bright as fresh paint against the dry earth. The back of the house was different. The sliding glass door that led to the kitchen had been shattered. A heavy, gray stone one of the river rocks. Angela used to border her flower beds lay on the linoleum inside, surrounded by thousands of glittering green shards. Silas walked up the steps, his revolver in his hand. He didn't look at Dews. They had done this too many times to need the talk. He stepped through the broken frame, his boots making a dry crunch on the glass. The kitchen was a combat zone. A heavy oak table had been overturned, its legs sticking into the air like those of a dead horse, and the contents of the cupboards had been swept onto the floor, jars of peaches, tins of flour, plates of blue-patterned china, all smashed and mixed with the flour and the glass. Angela Duff lay near the stove. She was 90 years old, but she had been a big woman in her youth, and she had not died easily. Her fingers were hooked into the iron grate of the oven, and her blue cotton dress was torn at the shoulder. Her face was bruised, where she had hit the corner of the range. But the wound that had killed her was the same as the others, a single, small-caliber hole just behind the left ear. "Oh, Jesus," Dews said behind him. In the passage that led to the small parlor lay her companion, Lester Lavar, a retired detrider, who still wore his silver-buckled belt and his high-heeled boots. He was lying on his side, his hands folded over his chest, as if he were trying to keep something from spilling out. He had been shot twice in the chest, but there was also a long, dark tear in his wool shirt where a blade had been drawn across his ribs, the wool stiff with dried blood. "2 weapons," Silas said, kneeling beside Lester, the .22 and a knife. "He's getting louder." "What do you mean, louder?" Croft asked from the porch. He was holding onto the doorframe, his shoulders shaking. "He's not hiding them anymore," Silas said, rising. With the peaks, he took his time. He stayed in the house. He washed the floor. Here, he just broke the glass and started digging. He wanted their car. He walked through the house to the front driveway. Angela Duff's old Buick, gold-painted '96 sedan with a white vinyl roof, was still parked under the carport, the keys not in the ignition. "He didn't get the keys," Silas said. "Then where is he?" Dews asked. Silas looked out at the willows that grew along the river ditch. The water was only 4 inches deep, a thin, green thread that ran through the gravel bars. But the brush was 6 feet high and thick as... "He's on foot," Silas said, "and he's within 500 yards of where we're standing." Chapter 8. The Iron in the Dirt. By noon, the Lyon County Sheriff's Department had put 20 men on the river road, and the Washoe County SWAT team was coming down the interstate in 3 black vans, their sirens screaming through the high pass. The neighborhood had been locked down. The deputies went house to house, their shotguns held across their chests, their boots kicking open the wooden gates of the chicken coops in the tool sheds. The local radio station had interrupted its farm report to tell the people of Fernley to stay inside, lock their doors, and keep their rifles handy. "We got a track," a deputy named Miller called out from the ditch behind Angela Duff's garden. Silas walked over. In the soft, wet sand of the irrigation ditch, where the water had seeped through the bank, was a single, deep footprint. It was a boot print, but the sole had a peculiar mark, a small, circular lug in the center of the heel that had been worn flat on the left side. "That's him," Silas said. "He's heading toward the old railway cut." The railway cut was a mile long, a deep, gravel-sided trench where the Southern Pacific had laid its tracks in 1912, before abandoning the route for the river path. The sides were 20 feet high, steep and sliding, covered in cheatgrass and wild mustard that had gone yellow in the heat. The SWAT team arrived at 12. They were young men, 25 and 30, with black helmets and heavy nylon vests that made them look like giant beetles. They didn't talk to the deputies. They moved in 3-man cells, their short rifles held at the ready, their boots moving through the brush with a neat, mechanical rhythm. "He's not in the cut," the team leader said to Silas after 40 minutes. We ran the dogs down to the bridge. They lost the scent at the concrete. He didn't go to the bridge, Silas said, looking at the houses that sat on the ridge above the cut. They were small, owner-built places with corrugated iron roofs and yards full of old cars and discarded washing machines. He went up. A call came from the fourth house on the ridge, a place owned by an old rail worker named Joe Vance. Joe says he's got someone in his cellar, the deputy on the line said. Says he heard the wood groan under the kitchen. Silas and Dews ran up the slope, their boots sliding in the loose gravel of the embankment. The wind was howling now, blowing the sand into their eyes, until they had to squint to see the red-painted siding of Joe's house. Joe Vance was 80, with a wooden leg he had gotten from a coupling accident in the Sparks yard 40 years before. He was sitting on his front porch, with a double-barreled shotgun across his knees, his eyes fixed on the small, square wooden door that led to the crawl space under his kitchen. He's under there, Joe said, not looking at Silas. He tried the back door first, but I had the latch down. Then I heard him dragging himself through the weeds under the floor. He's got no gun, David. Or if he has, he's too coward to use it. Silas knelt by the hatch. The crawl space was only 30 inches high, a dark trench of dry earth and old cedar posts that smelled of dry rot and mice. Jeremiah, Silas called out. The name had come from the prison records at Carson, a heroin addict named Jeremiah Bean who had been released 3 weeks before after serving 2 years for a burglary. Yarrington. He had been staying with his sister in a trailer court 2 miles down the river road. There was no answer from the dark, only the dry, rhythmic sound of someone scraping a tin can against a pipe. Jeremiah, Silas said. His voice was very quiet, the tone he used when he was talking to a horse that had gotten its leg caught in a wire fence. We have 20 rifles out here, son. They're going to put the gas under there if you don't come out. It's hard to breathe in the dirt. The scraping stopped. For 3 long seconds, the only sound was the wind hitting the tin roof of Joe Vance's house. Then, a face appeared in the opening. It did not look like the face of a man who had killed 5 people. It was small, white, and smeared with grease from the plumbing pipes. The hair was cut short, showing the shape of a skull that was slightly too flat at the back. The eyes were wide, watery, and yellow around the rims, like those of a sick dog. They're talking, Bean said. His voice was a high, wet rattle. They said you were coming. Silas reached down and took him by the wrist. The bone was thin, no larger than a willow branch, and the skin was cold, despite the noon heat. He hauled him out into the gravel yard like a dead calf. Bean didn't fight. He lay on his side in the dirt, his knees pulled up to his chest, his hands tucked under his chin. He looked like an animal that had been dug out of its burrow by a badger, small and wet and blind in the glare. When the deputies turned him over to put the steel on his wrists, they found he was holding 2 key fobs, one for Arthur Peake's blue Chevrolet and one for Angela Duff's gold Buick. In his pocket were $64 in crumpled $5 bills and a small, silver pocket watch that had belonged to Lester Lemon, the hand still pointing to 12 minutes past 10. Part 3. The Confessional. Chapter 9. The Conversation. The interrogation room at the Lyon County Jail in Yarrington was 10 feet square, with walls of gray-painted concrete block and a single light bulb that hung from a black cord in the center of the ceiling. Jeremiah Bean sat in a chair of tubular steel, his arms folded over the chest of his orange jail jumpsuit. He had been washed, but his skin still had the gray, greasy look of a man who lived on white bread and sugar water. Silas sat across from him, his yellow pad blank on the green linoleum table between them. He had not offered Bean a cigarette. He did not offer him water. You want to tell me about the voices, Silas asked. Bean looked at the clock on the wall. The second hand was moving with a dry, mechanical shuck, shuck, shuck that seemed to be the only sound in the building. They have the high ones, Bean said, like the birds that get into the swamp cooler in August. They tell me to go to the houses where the old people live. They say the old ones have the gold in their mattresses. Silas let his pencil lie on the paper. Who told you that, Jeremiah? The cousin you were staying with. Bean's eyes shifted. They were very small. The pupils dilated until they looked like 2 drops of black ink in the gray iris. No, the little ones. They live in the canal. You're not crazy, Jeremiah, Silas said. His voice was flat, without any of the heat or the anger that had been in the street. You're just a thief who got scared. You went to the Peake's house on Friday to get the gold, and Arthur was in his chair. You shot him because he looked at you. He was small, Bean said, his voice dropping to a whisper. He didn't need all that room. He had 3 televisions in the front room. None of them worked, but he had them. And Martha? She was in the kitchen, Bean said. She was making that bacon. I don't like the smell of bacon. It makes my head go round. So I told her to go into the room with the clothes. You shot her in the closet. She wouldn't lie down, Bean said, as if he were complaining about a dog that wouldn't mind. She kept trying to find her glasses. I told her she didn't need them where she was going, but she wouldn't listen. She was an old woman. She was very stubborn. And then you stayed there. The house was warm, Bean said. They had that bed with the yellow blankets. I haven't slept in a bed like that since I was in the home in Elko. And they had the peaches in the cellar, the ones with the blue labels. You stayed with them for 3 days, Silas said, while they were in the closet. They didn't make any noise, Bean said. I like a quiet house. My sister's trailer has 3 kids in it, and they're always hitting the metal with their spoons. You can't sleep with that. He looked down at his hands, which were small and clean now, the nails trimmed by the jailer. The paper thrower, Silas said. Ellie. He was in the road, Bean said. I was going to Reno to see the girls at the parlor, but the truck went dead. I didn't know how to work the pump under the hood. He came by in his red truck and asked me if I wanted a lift. And you shot him. He had those eyes, Bean said, his voice rising a register. The one eye was pointing at the floor, and the other was pointing at me. He looked like he was thinking about something. I don't like people who think like that. So you dragged him into the scrub. His pants came down, Bean said, his face twisting into a look of genuine disgust. I tried to pull him by the heels, but his trousers were too loose. I don't like to touch their skin when they're cold like that. It feels like the lard you get in the tubs. Silas leaned back in his chair. He felt a deep, dry weariness in his bones, the same weariness he had felt after 40 hours on the line during the Derby Dam search. You're going to the chamber, Jeremiah, Silas said. Bean did not look up. He was currently trying to peel a small piece of loose skin from his thumb. They don't have the gas anymore, Bean said. The lawyer said they use the needle now. He said it's like going to sleep after you've had the beer. No, Silas said, rising from the table and picking up his pad. It's not like that at all. Chapter 10. The intersection of Interstate 80 and the Red Cut exit was quiet 3 years later. The service station had been abandoned, its windows boarded up with heavy sheets of plywood that had gone gray under the sun. The flagpole had been taken down, leaving only the 3 rusted bolts sticking out of the concrete apron like old teeth. Marcia Longfellow stood by the barbed wire fence, her hands tucked into the pockets of her wool coat. The wind was coming off the sink, carrying the scent of dry mustard and the cold, metallic smell of the winter hills. At her feet, stuck into the gravel of the ditch, was a small cross made of 2 pieces of weathered pine tied together with copper wire. A faded plastic wreath of yellow daisies was wrapped around the joint, its petals frayed by the wind until they looked like feathers. They're going to pave the shoulder next month, Silas said, standing beside her. He had retired from the department 6 months before, and his face had gone softer, the dry lines around his eyes deeper than they had been during the hunt. Let them pave it, Marcia said. She didn't look at him. They can't pave the dirt under it. No, Silas said. They said he's still in the prison at Ely, she said. The sister's still trying to get the lawyers to say he has the head. He's got the head trouble, Silas said, looking out over the plain where the trucks were moving in a long, gray line toward the western pass. But it's not the kind they have a name for. It's just the He reached down and touched the wooden cross. The wood was cold, the copper wire green with rust. You want me to move it back to the fence? Silas asked, where the graders won't hit it. Leave it where it is, David, she said, turning back toward her car. If they run it over, I'll just make another one. I've got plenty of wood in the shed. Silas watched her get into her old wagon, the engine catching with a dry, rattling cough that sounded like the wind in the chimney. He stood there for a long time after she had gone, his boots sinking half an inch into the soft silt of the ditch, watching the yellow daisies flutter in the sagebrush like the pages of an old newspaper that had been left behind by the road. Part 4. The Anatomy of the Sink. Chapter 11. The Long Silt. In the high country, water is the only currency that does not lose its value through inflation. The Truckee River flows out of the granite lip of Lake Tahoe, runs through the narrow gorges of the Sierra Nevada, and then spends its remaining strength trying to irrigate the alfalfa flats of the Lahontan Valley before dying in the gray silt of the Pyramid Lake Basin. It is a river that has been fought over by lawyers, and railroad barons since the first survey stakes were driven into the saltgrass in 1860. Silas sat in his pickup on the high bluff above the Darby Dam, 20 miles east of Sparks, where the water was split between the riverbed and the concrete canal that ran south toward the Carson Sink. The concrete of the canal was 60 years old, gray and cracked and stained with the green slime of the river moss. In the summer, the water ran through it at 8 miles an hour of flat, silent speed that looked slow but would pull a horse under before the animal could get its footing in the mud. We used to find them in the siphons, Silas said to Croft, who was sitting beside him with a thermographic map of the county. The sheep, mostly. They'd go down to the edge to get a drink, slip on the moss, and then they'd float down to the grates at the first tunnel. They'd look like large, gray balloons by the time we got the winches on them. Bean spent 2 years in the Yerington work camp, Croft said, his finger tracing the line of the canal where it crossed the county boundary. He worked the brush-clearing crews on the ditch banks. The supervisor said he was quiet, said he didn't talk to the other boys except to ask for their lard bread. He knew the river, Silas said. A boy like that doesn't live on the highway. He lives in the willows. He knows where the pipes go under the road. He knows where the gates are unlocked. Why didn't he go to the hills? Croft asked. If he'd gone south into the desert toward Rawhide, we'd still be looking for his bones. The desert is dry, Silas said. A heroin boy doesn't like the dry. He needs the water. He needs to know where the shade is. In the high basin, if you go 10 miles from the river, you're dead in 48 hours unless you have a... He didn't have a key. He only had to point to... He turned the key in his truck's ignition, the starter grinding twice before the old 8-cylinder engine caught. The vibration shook the metal dash, making a pair of brass handcuffs in the glove box clink against a box of lead shot. Let's go look at the sister's trailer, Silas said. Marty said she's still got the blue truck's spare tire in her garden. Chapter 12. The Silver City. The trailer park was named the Whispering Sands, though the only thing that whispered was the high-tension wires that ran from the substation at the lime plant to the mines in the range behind the highway. There were 40 trailers, arranged in 4 neat rows on a shelf of white clay that had been leveled by a bulldozer in the late 70s. They were mostly old, narrow units with small, square windows and propane tanks chained to the hitch frames to keep them from being stolen by the... Jeremiah Bean's sister, a woman of 26 named Clara, lived in the 12th unit. She was standing on her wooden steps when Silas parked his truck under her clothesline. She was wearing a faded pink housecoat and had a pair of white plastic curlers pinned into her hair with bobby pins. Her face pale and thin like her brother's, but with a line of dark hair on her upper lip that she had tried to paint over with bleach. He didn't have no gun here, she said before Silas could clear the door of his truck. The police already came and took his boots. They took the little radio he got from the old man to... We're not here for the boots, Clara, Silas said, stepping into the dust of her yard. We wanted to know about the letters. What letters? The ones he wrote from the camp, Silas said. The supervisor said he wrote 4 letters to his sister. Said he spent 3 weeks' pay on the stamps. She looked past Silas at Croft, who was currently standing by her sister's garden small circle of river rocks, where 3 tomato plants were dying in the gray silt. In the center of the circle sat an old, 15-inch tire from a Chevrolet pickup, its tread filled with dry sand and dead weeds. There in the box under the sink, she said. Her voice was not angry. It was simply flat, the voice of someone who had been asked the same questions by the county people since she was 6 years old. The welfare lady already looked at them. She said they didn't have nothing in them about the old people. Silas followed her into the trailer. The air inside was hot and smelled of boiled cabbage, baby powder, and the damp, metallic smell of the evaporative cooler that was mounted in the living room window. A small child, perhaps 3 years old, was sitting on the linoleum floor, playing with a rusted iron hinge from a meat box. Clara knelt by the sink and pulled out a shoebox made of gray cardboard. It had once held a pair of work shoes from the Montgomery ward in Reno, but now it was filled with old utility bill, school reports with unsatisfactory stamped in red ink on the margins, and 4 sheets of lined paper that had been folded into small, tight squares. Silas took the first sheet. The handwriting was small, the letters leaning to the left, the ink faded to a pale violet from the cheap pens they sold in the commissary. Dear Clara, the letter read. They have the river here. It runs through the concrete like the one in Elko, but the water is gray because of the mud. The man who has the bed next to me says there is fish in it. but they don't have no eyes because of the dark under the hill. I told him he was a liar, but he said he's seen them. He said they have the white skins like the lard. Silas turned the paper over. There was no date, only the stamp of the Nevada Department of Corrections on the corner of the fold. They have the bacon on Tuesdays, the second letter said. I don't like the fat. It gets in my teeth and then I can't sleep because of the clicking. The little ones said they would come on Friday, but they didn't show. I think they got lost in the range. There was a lot of dry country between here and the road. He was always like that, Clara said, leaning against her counter, her hands tucked into her sleeves. He'd sit on the floor and hit his knees with his hands until they went red. My father said he had the water on his brain from when he fell out of the pickup in but the doctor said he was just slow. He wasn't slow when he went through the Peaks house, Silas said, folding the paper and putting it into his pocket. He knew where the key to the lockbox was. He knew where the silver spoons were. That was the heroin, she said. Her voice dropped, and she looked down at the child on the floor. He'd do anything when he had the shake. He took my mother's teeth once, the gold ones from the back. He sold them to the man who has the junkyard in Wadsworth for $12. Where did he get the gun, Clara? He found it, she said. He said he found it in the ditch by the Mustang. Some truck driver probably threw it out when the police had the block down. He had it in his shoe for 3 days before he went to the Peak place. Silas looked around the kitchen. It was clean, but it was the cleanliness of Pavatitha. Linoleum worn down to the black backing where the feet went most often. The counter patched with silver tape. The small refrigerator humming with a high, dry rattle that sounded like a cicada in the sage. He's not coming back here, Clara, Silas said. I know, she said, her voice dry. The lawyer said they're going to keep him in Ely. He said they have the cold rooms there where the wind doesn't